All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Ms. Ford, would you call the roll?
Chairman Wingate.
Here.
Vice Chairman McClendon.
Here.
Mrs. Hill. Here. Mrs. Jones. Mr. Perez.
Here.
Mrs. Robinson. Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mrs. Thurman. Here. Mr. Walker.
Here.
Mr. Macon. Interim Superintendent Dr. Towns. Here. Thank you.
All right, I have the following request to amend the agenda. Under item Roman numeral 5, our exemplars section, we're going to remove recognition there. We're going to do that at a later date. And then under board matters, item Roman numeral number 9, we're going to add item F, dedication of Sale Creek football field, as requested by Dr. Leanne Welch, the principal of Sale Creek Middle High School. And then we're also going to add item G, which would be a discussion of Tyner Middle and Tyner High School, requested by Ms. Carissa Jones, our board colleague, and by Mr. McClendon. And then under item Roman numeral 10, delegations, we have a request to remove A, Amy Jarrell, and E, Angie Nunley, and then add Philip McGrath, Taylor Lyons, Wendy Proctor, and then also Jalen Kalia and Demetrius, speaking regarding Tyner Academy. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Mrs. Ford.
Mrs. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. McClendon,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Chairman Wingate.
Yes, that brings us to our pledge to the flag and our meditation, brought to us tonight by Ms. Christy Drake, principal of East Ridge Middle School.
Good evening. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to Dr. Towns, interim superintendent, Chairman Wingate, and fellow board members. Thank you for this opportunity to do the medication for this gathering today. My name is Christy Caldwell Drake, and I am the proud principal at East Ridge Middle School, home of the Pioneers. Now first, I want to congratulate all of you in this room, everyone that's outside, all students, parents, teachers, administrators, board members, all leaders in Hamilton County Schools. We made it through 2020-21, an unprecedented, unimaginable season with COVID-19, which caused life-changing situations, circumstances, sickness, and also loss. But through those challenging hardships and struggle, we continued to move forward. There were days of frustration, doubt, fear, and struggle, but we moved through. We stayed the course. We maintained on-campus learning throughout 90% of the 2021 school year, outperformed the state in 24 out of 28 tested areas. That's worth celebrating. And I'm proud to say it was under the phenomenal leadership of Dr. Brian Johnson. Well, as you know, Dr. Brian Johnson resigned. And yes, now we're in transition. We're in transition in 2021-22 school year. Yes, transition can be uncomfortable. Transition can be difficult, but I want to encourage you. I want to give you some good news. We do have good news. The person, and I might add a woman, that is holding the baton, the torch, is quite capable of doing the job. And that is none other than Dr. Nakia Towns. And alongside her in leadership is the interim deputy superintendent, Dr. Justin Robertson. That's good news. So be encouraged. We're in good hands. Now we must continue to work together to continue to thrive, to achieve, and to continue the momentum of the great work here in Hamilton County Schools. Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. All right, next we will have a recognition of Summer Reach employees. Dr. Neely Parker.
Thank you, Chairman Wingate. I would like to invite at this time Dr. Kelly Weiss, who was our program director for Summer Reach. And if there are any of our district leaders that helped us with Summer Reach, we would like to invite you to come forward at this time for special recognition. Dr. Weiss?
It is my great privilege to recognize our teachers of Summer Reach. We had over 6,000 students who signed up for Summer Reach, and they have done amazing, or 6,000 students that signed up. Our teachers who came did amazing work with those students, and our site directors who worked tirelessly with me deserve much of that thanks as well. They sent in names of teachers that went above and beyond for our students. This list doesn't encapsulate all of our teachers, but these are the ones the site directors chose to recognize tonight. Shane McNeese, who worked with YCAP. Carrie Stidham, who worked at Ooltewah Elementary. Jennifer Hartley at Spring Creek. Adam Foster at Spring Creek. Betty Williams, who worked with the Urban League. She was the after-school site director there. Jan Rogers. Carol Austin at Lookout Valley. Jan Rogers was also at Lookout Valley. Madison Cartwright at Wolf Teaver Creek. Shelby Stoner at Eastside Elementary. Leslie Booth at Tyner Middle Academy. Rosa Hines at Tyner Middle Academy. Kelvin Young at Tyner Middle Academy. Liz Fleming at East Brainerd Elementary School. Rachel Hill at East Brainerd Elementary. Caroline Mickey from East Brainerd Elementary. Kim Johnson at East Brainerd Elementary. By the way, East Brainerd Elementary was one of our largest sites. Jeffrey McKnight at Soddy Elementary. Kimberly Stanton at East Brainerd Elementary. And Jennifer Hartley at Spring Creek. All of these teachers made an impact with our students this summer, and we could not have done Summer Reach without them. So thank you very much for all of your service this summer and all the good work you did with our students. And thank you, Dr.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I know that all these guys did a great job and sacrificed their summer, but I just got to say, Shane McNeese worked with us at End Zone, not YCAP. That was my former life. And I mean, it's just unbelievable. I know that he had a certain number of hours. He was supposed to be there every day. He always got there early to meet the parents before our day started. Many days stayed throughout the day, went on field trips with us. That obviously he didn't get paid to do all that stuff. And I'm sure there's other teachers that did the very same thing at their various sites. But I just can't thank Shane enough and all you guys for sacrificing your summer for these kids. So I just need to say that, Mr. Chairman.
And a certificate we would like to recognize you with. And I know because we're watching COVID protocols, well, I'll give you a thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. Thank you all for all you did this summer. Thank you very much. All right. Next, we'll have a Future Ready 2023 update. I believe Ms. Shannon Moody is going to do that.
Just needs to turn it on.
What? There we go.
Hey. Good evening. I'm really excited to come here and talk to you guys about data. We did a little bit of a public release, but this is our opportunity to really dig into data a bit more. I'm Shannon Moody. I'm the Director of Accountability and Research. And as you can tell by the big smile on my face, I love talking about this stuff, right? Like, you guys are going to be in it with me. I know you will. So we have a few slides to go through with you today of what we know with our data. As you guys know, during this course of time, we get data releases from the state that continue to come out through the month of August. So I'm sure that we'll be coming back talking about additional data as we get it. But for now, this is what we have been able to work through and what's unembargoed at this time to speak about. So if you all,
No, you go. You click. I'll
Okay.
go. So we just want to kick off, and thank you, Shannon, for that introduction. We always like to reset in terms of where we've been, and Shannon's going to dig into the details. But we want to go back to where we were with this board at the beginning of Dr. Johnson's administration and the vision that this board had for where Hamilton County schools would be. And one of the headlines that came out of that is that we wanted to be the fastest improving district in Tennessee, and we have proven ourselves to meet that mark. With the help of, next slide, with the help of the Future Ready 2023 plan, we've really focused around 5 action areas, with accelerating student achievement being at the center of all of those, all the work that we're doing, and making sure that we're supporting children to reach their highest potential. And we've anchored around these focused 5 performance targets. And so we talk about them a lot. You know, we have KPIs, annual targets, and each year we update those annual targets, as well as talking each month about the work that we've been doing. So with that, we really were looking forward to the spring 21 data. You all know that in spring of 2020, we were not able to complete the assessment because we were all in quarantine for COVID. So we knew that there was this opportunity that we had to try to make sure that we closed the learning gaps that students might have experienced from missing the entire fourth quarter of being in person for the 19-20 school year, and then coming into 2021 school year, we all lived through the various transitions that we had. We were able to maintain being on campus 90% of the time, but we were certainly worried about what this disruption would do to our youngest learners and how we would navigate all the changes that we have. And so because of the disruption that we have, I think it's important to set the context. This is a new baseline. We know that we had lots of ground to make up for. The commissioner has told us, don't compare 2019 to 2021. We're going to do a little of that, though, because we always want to look longitudinally. But we do know that there was this year that we skipped. We do know that there were children who didn't attend in person for the entirety of the 2021 school year. Even with all that said, I do think we have some really good news to report in terms of the progress and resilience that was demonstrated by our children and our families and led by the work of our teachers. So with that, I'm going to let Shannon take us through the deep dive of the key takeaways around our data.
So we're going to be looking at TN Ready results. Very particularly, we're going to be looking at just the achievement side of things, right, as we dig into this as well. So before we look at the numbers, I think it's really important to figure out what we're looking at. And so we took the information that came to us about our test takers, which students took the tests, and how many tests they took, and looked at that across the state and Hamilton County to see what percentage of our test takers fell in different categories. And so you see here, anywhere there's a green arrow, just to point out, is a place where we had a larger percent of test takers in that particular category than the state overall. And you'll notice we see Black, Hispanic, Native American students, if we look at that line. We had 48% of our tests taken coming from students in that demographic, whereas the state had about 36.5% of students. So we're pretty comparable to the state, but you'll notice in most places we actually have a more diverse group of students that were test takers in our district. We look down along racial lines too, where you see that we have a higher percentage of African American students taking the test, a higher percentage of Hispanic students. We have a higher percentage of English language learners taking the test than across the state of Tennessee. So I think this is really important as we look at our data comparatively. We are pretty aligned to the state, so it's a good look at where we compare to the state, but recognizing that we're actually more diverse than the state as a district. So we are a diverse district. From the chart before, we actually know that the majority of our test takers, 51% of our test takers, are students of color. We also see what we looked at there as well, that we have a higher percentage of those test takers being English learners than we see across the state. And as we see that, we also see that we're overperforming as we continue to see this increase in diversity in our district. And so typically, right, as you're looking at data and demographics in that way, when you see a higher percentage of students in historically underperforming subgroups, you would assume then that we would have larger gaps when we compare to the state. But as we're going to look at, we actually outperformed the state, even with seeing our diversity increase in our district. We also know when we're talking about the Future Ready 2023 goals that the board set for us, that these are the majority of our students are in subgroups, and so it's going to take a particular focus on how we're performing in subgroups in order to meet our overall goals, since that's the majority of our test takers and population in our district. So as we dig in, we're going to dig into each one of these areas. But we have some key takeaways to frame here. And so one, which is what I think everyone's heard at this point that we're so proud of, is that we outperformed the state in 24 of 28 tested areas. And very particularly, which is big for me, a numbers person, 5 of those areas were exceeding the state by 5% or more. So when we're talking about large numbers of students this way, 5% is a big number when we look at it in that sense. We looked at our youngest learners, and we saw that our youngest learners actually exceeded statewide performance in every subject. We looked particularly at our third grade ELA and saw that that proficiency of students increased compared to the cohort of students in 2019. And even actually while we were implementing a brand new literacy curriculum in the district as well. We found that math and particular subgroups of students, our performance there, seem to be most impacted by pandemic disruptions and will require us to continue to focus and address learning gaps in those areas. And then as we look at the data, we really saw that our learning loss mitigation strategies, right, we believe those were really successful. Things like we just recognized summer reach, remote instruction, in-person learning, and particularly community partnerships. Those actually led to smaller declines in Hamilton County schools than we saw across their peers in the state of Tennessee. So one thing we did see, of course, we outperformed the state in 24 of 28 tested areas. And when we think about this in comparison, we look back to 2016-17. At that point of time, we were only outperforming the state of 3 areas. So when you think about it this way, right, we were looking ahead at the state. We were trying to catch the state. We were behind them. And this year, as our data came out, we actually saw in almost every area, we're actually above or outperforming the state, with those 5 blue areas being places where we were greater than 5%. And all of those areas are listed on the right for you. Again, anything in blue is where we were greater than 5%. When we break this down by grade and grade band, something really interesting to me pops out here, which is that 3rd through 5th grade, those youngest learners, right? So we see in that category, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, in every single tested area, students were outperforming their peers across the state in those same grade levels and subject areas. With particularly math, as we look at it, sometimes like our 3rd graders, almost 10% higher than their peers across the state. When we look at and keep this comparison from 2016 to 2021, and we look at how we've increased in our comparison to the state, we see that every single high school subject has actually increased in comparison. So to point out something like U.S. history up here at the top, we started in 2016 with 9.1% below the state average, and this year we're finding ourselves at 13.8% above the state average, which is this 22.9% swing in performance when we look at ourselves compared to the state average. When we're looking at 3rd through 8th grade, each grade level and subject, we see a very similar trend. We see almost every single grade level and subject having an increase in comparison to the state since 2016, particularly up here at the top, 3rd grade math, right, which went from about 1.5 percentage points below the state. We were kind of trying to get to the state, to this year being almost 10% above the state when compared to their peers. So it brings up the question, what we looked at before, our youngest learners, right? And we saw that our youngest learners exceeded statewide performance in every subject, and particularly 3rd grade ELA saw a proficiency increase. So when we dig into 3rd grade ELA, we see that the state actually dropped in proficiency. Looking at the cohort of kids that were 3rd graders in 2019, we actually dropped about 6 percentage points, which is something that the state is really digging into and looking at as we move forward. When we look at Hamilton County's cohort of 3rd graders this year, they're actually performing at a higher place than 3rd graders in 2019. So we actually saw an increase, while our peers across the state saw a dramatic decrease in particular 3rd grade ELA. And again, this is while we were implementing a brand new literacy program, particular in our district. Looking at 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade in ELA, we see that our students really held steady, honestly. There were small dips, but really held steady across those grades. But when you look at the graph, that's showing the comparison again to their peers across the state this year. So the blue bar is Hamilton County, and what we're looking at is our students in each grade level in English language arts are actually significantly above where other 3rd graders are in the state this year as data returned. And that's actually not just true for ELA. So these 2 graphs show us math on the left and science on the right, and we see the same trend for our early learners, right? Our earliest test takers, that they're actually significantly outperforming their peers across the state this year in terms of achievement. We did, though, see math and subgroup performance, particularly as something that may have been most impacted this year with the pandemic. And we're going to really be digging into our focus there and figuring out how we address those learning gaps as we continue through the years. So here's our high school subject results. And one thing that really stands out right here in the middle is math, but very particular Algebra 1, which is one of our Focus 5 goals. And it seems that we are able to see in these results that kids really struggled with the skill gaps that occurred, right? Particular in math, when we kind of look at this trend overall that occurred because of the pandemic. And when we look at 3rd through 8th grade, we kind of see the same trend popping up with middle school math, which seems to follow that trajectory as well, where it looks like students really struggled with those skills gaps that may have occurred. Taking a look at our subgroups, this graph particularly shows us subgroup performance. Again, those 4 historically underperforming subgroups were measured by the state: Black, Hispanic, Native American, economically disadvantaged, English language learners, and students with disabilities, in that order on the graph. And we see that all of our subgroups actually took a bit of a backwards turn this year, right? Except for English language learners, actually, where we saw ourselves hold steady. But we saw dips with each one of our subgroups of students as we dig into the data. But we also, when we look at this comparatively, I think it helps us understand our learning loss mitigation strategies. You know, Hamilton County really jumped on a lot of strategies at the very beginning to try to mitigate the loss that we were hearing about and reading about and worried about for our students. So these are things including a lot of community partnerships that came about from the pandemic that led to actually significantly smaller declines for Hamilton County schools. And so when we talk about smaller declines, here's really what we're looking at. This graph on the screen shows you on the left side of the graph our English language arts, all grades and subjects combined. On the right side of the screen is math, all grades and subjects combined. Anything in gray is the state, anything blue is Hamilton County. And so what we see here is on the left side, the state dropped about 5% overall in English language arts subjects, where we're seeing in Hamilton County our students dropped about 2.5%. We see a similar trend in math where the state, our peers across the state actually dropped about 12%, where in Hamilton County we dropped about 8%. So we believe there are a lot of successful strategies that actually led to mitigating some of the learning loss that could have occurred for our students. We see this same trend kind of happening in subgroups, but there's 2 things to really point out when we look at the data this way for subgroups. Again, what we saw previously, we see less declines for students in our historically underperforming subgroups than we saw in our peers across the state. But in every single area, right, we see that we're actually performing higher than the state in each one of our subgroups. And so again, we're seeing that trend where our students are actually at an achievement level higher than what we see across the state. Even though there were declines, they weren't quite as substantial across the state, which I think really speaks to the resiliency of our students and the efforts here as well. So of course, this all leads us back to what I think is what we take away from this data right now, right? That we've been on this 4-year trajectory, a historic trajectory of being the fastest improving district in Tennessee. And when we look at what that means year over year, right, we started 16-17 with just 3 areas above the state. We were really looking towards the state to try to get there. In 17-18, we got to 5 areas above the state. In 18-19, which was the historic kind of banner year behind me, right, we got to 9 areas across the state. And then what we're seeing this year in this achievement data that's come out, jumping from 9 to 24 areas across the state, and what the significance that is for us as we continue to move forward, now being at a place where we're above our peers across the state, and really where we take that moving forward. So again, just to highlight some of these key takeaways, right? We outperformed the state in those 24 of 28 areas. Our youngest learners were a really bright spot for us when we look at they exceeded the state in every area, and we actually saw the gains in our 3rd grade ELA, which is a focus area for us. We don't want to lose sight of our subgroup performance and our math performance and how we continue to address those gaps. And we really want to think through the successful mitigation strategies we had for learning loss and what that meant for us this year and how we continue those through.
So to close us out, we've got a lot of momentum. There's been a lot of great work that's been done. And although we were definitely challenged by the 2021 school year, I think that this is clear evidence that our teachers our families, our students, our school leaders, we were more resilient, and we were able to perform in a way that protected the academic progress of our kids, and that we are uplifting their overall well-being. And we couldn't have done that without the foundation that we had built in this community to collaborate around supporting our children and families. Shannon, if you'll go to the next slide. Partnerships like what we were able to do with EPB with the support of the city and the county and the Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation. We were able to make sure that 14,000 economically disadvantaged students had reliable, high-speed internet to their homes, which meant that they were able to access remote learning when, as you recall, we went to remote from December and didn't come back until February in last school year. But we were still able to have these learning results. When you think about the work that we did with virtual learning centers, that was highlighted in a national publication. And it was with those community partners that we made sure that families who were choosing remote learning had a place for their children to go and be able to have support of adults in those smaller pods, learning pods, and that all children had access to that kind of support if the family felt more comfortable being in HCS at home versus being on campus. And then the work that we did around Summer Reach. You all recall that we actually did Summer Reach last summer. People thought we were crazy in the middle of a pandemic. I'm looking at Neely. They thought we were crazy. In the middle of a pandemic, that we were like, we're going to, in July, launch 3 weeks of learning, and we brought back our most at-risk learners, about 2,000 children, where we were really able to test our safety protocols, not to mention getting kids back in school who hadn't been in school with us since March. And this summer, we doubled down on that with 2 of those 3-week sessions where we were able to serve the 6,700 students who registered. And again, this is all after our teachers had an exhausting year, and they still came back to work with kids during this summer to make sure that we didn't lose that academic progress. And so, as we move forward, as I highlighted in the community message yesterday, I think in this time of transition, our team is focused on 3 main points. We want to maintain continuity. We're going to keep working on Future Ready 2023. We're in the last 2 years of that strategic plan, and we want to keep moving forward on that work. We're also going to make sure that we elevate Blueprint 2030. I think we're going to have some conversation today about some of our buildings and the state that they're in, and we need to make progress on that. We're going to continue to elevate this notion of closing the opportunity gap. We've got great partnerships with the Children's Cabinet, with the county mayor heralding that. We've got now the city mayor with the community forward schools and 7 schools where we're going to invest with those wraparound supports. We've got student success planning that we've kicked off, and we're now in the 3rd year of that work in partnership with Harvard. And then we've got the board's educational equity policy that we will need to fully implement, and we'll be bringing conversation about that in next month's board meeting. And finally, we've got to support acceleration and recovery. We've got ESSER funds to help us do that. We're going to make sure that we focus on literacy. We've got to remediate around the challenges with math, but we're going to braid funds as well to support our strategic plan. And I'll end with this summary. ESSER 3.0, we have communicated to you all, the board, you have in front of you the summary of our ESSER 3.0 budget that we're going to submit. And this is just the overarching, the focus areas of ESSER. And you can see what stands out, that commitment to our facilities. We've got $30 million dedicated to facilities. We've reserved $25 million for a new Tyner project and $5 million that's going to the CSLA project. So $30 million is reserved for facilities. But then the bulk of the rest of those dollars are to mitigate learning loss and to accomplish learning acceleration. And so that's where we're showing where our investments are going, and we're combining that with other dollars that we've received from the American Rescue Plan for students with special needs as well as public health. And so we are well positioned to really build on the momentum of the last 4 years and Dr. Johnson's administration, but to continue to support our teachers who are doing great work. And there's nothing against the rest of our peers in Tennessee, but I would say any day of the week, we have the best team here in Hamilton County. We've got the best teachers here in Hamilton County. So with that, if you'll close, as we always say, we expect excellence. Every child deserves an excellent teacher. Every teacher deserves an excellent leader. And our schools deserve excellent resources to meet the diverse needs of our learners. So we'll open it up to any questions. Thank you all.
Any comments, questions? Mr. Perez and then Mrs. Hill.
Well, again, we've said this many times, and I think I want to repeat what you said, Dr. Towns, which is a great thank you to everybody who worked incredibly tirelessly the last year, and as a result, we're able to at least push back on some of the learning loss. We said at some point last year, we don't know what we don't know, and before we distribute ESSER funds, let's find out what we don't know and then distribute accordingly. And as we will speak about some of those funds going to facilities, if they go to facilities, they go away from mitigation, right? And so facilities ideally would be funded through other means, but we're taking advantage of funds that are there to help increase the improvements. When I look at data, I also like data, so we're those nerds, right? We look at data, but unfortunately, when you're those nerds, you look at data in a different way than most people look at data, right? And so unfortunately, and I'll bring this in, unfortunately, there's two ways to become the fastest or the best district in all of Tennessee. One is to keep improving, another one is to hope that the state keeps doing worse, which we don't hope, right? Like if the state goes down, we're the best all of a sudden. And so, as I look at the data, clearly we've lost traction, and we need to make up that traction. And we need to get far above and beyond the numbers that we have. And so, again, I think just a call to the regular population now, not regular, we're all regular, to the population that we have a long way to go. There's some areas where we're at 16%, and we can say, well, we did better than the state, but we're still at 16%. That's not acceptable in any way, and we need to get beyond. And that's why at one point, probably in the beginning of the year, I made a comment, and I saw everyone's face like, oh, great, we got one of those board members. But made the comment that I don't really care to be the best in the state because I really just care that we be the best, right? Like we just keep driving forward. And to me, the use of ESSER funds, we've said this before as well, it's just important that we not use them to try to keep doing the same thing and see if we get different results, but try to see is there anything creative that we haven't been able to do before to see if we can push those results forward. And so I look at the ELL students, and of course that's we data people, we look for those numbers that don't seem to fit, and I'm deeply curious, I'm sure you guys will do the work, like why those stayed, and I'm gonna guess it's because those have a lot of extra support and resources surrounding them. So whatever it may be, I just hope that I was really excited about these numbers, so I saw how bad the state did. But at the same time, I'm very thankful because everybody really poured their souls into this last year, and we see that we were able to mitigate some of the losses. But we now have a lot of traction we have to pick up on. So thank you. And yet it's sobering, right? So it's a little bit of both. Thank you, and yet we have a lot of work ahead of us.
And if I may, to your point too, I think it's what you're bringing out, and what I saw as well, is that for many reasons we see ourselves above the state this year, and I think what that brings to me is like we are positioned and we are ready to stay above the state, right? And so the ways we got there, I think there's a lot about what we did to get there. It also isn't a pandemic year, but it sets us up when we think about that quote as the baseline year and the reset year to say, okay, this is where we're at now, and we're not looking back. Right? We're not going back to where we were, and we can continue the trajectory to be above that state as we move forward.
Mrs. Hill.
Thank you, Chair. Shannon, I really appreciate your breakdown and walking us through this data. I especially appreciate that you have pulled out our subgroups so that we could see beyond the overall average for the district. I'd love to talk with you and also with Dr. Towns about the pros and cons of also having our non-subgroup students represented on the same graph. I think that for me, and the other times I've seen the data presented that way, definitely helped me understand the urgency of the work, and not just hopelessness feeling perhaps of the work, or just how far we have to go, but holy cow, we figured out how to do it with some of our students, and now this is something we have to strive for without ceasing. So thank you for that. I know, as we all know, we have a lot of work to do. And my colleagues on the board know that I know nothing about sports, and that's because that is not a gift that my family has. And so we learn to celebrate things that maybe other people don't celebrate. And when my brother would swing that bat and miss, my father would cheer and say, "Good effort, way to swing." And sometimes that effort and knowing that somebody's there giving you a smile and a thumbs up really meant a lot. And I think another way that my family celebrates is we eat blizzards, Dairy Queen blizzards. I think every teacher in Hamilton County Schools deserves a blizzard for this. And I think we need to take a moment and give each other a pat on the back and say, we did that. And it was hard, and we did it. And then be ready to take the next steps forward. It is good to celebrate. Celebration brings joy to life, and joy makes us strong, I believe. There was one other thing, and it just flitted away from me, so perhaps I need to yield. Let me think. It gets worse. Oh, the ELA curriculum. It's interesting to me that we saw the gains that we saw in ELA. You know, we as a board discussed at length whether or not it was the appropriate time to adopt a new English language arts curriculum. And it is a rigorous program, and I talked a lot with the principals in District 6 about it and talked a lot with the teachers. And I'm very thankful that we as a board made the step to go full forward into that, because it, to me, as I think about where our strategic plan has us heading, it's a steep hill to climb, and to know we've got a really good tool makes me glad, and it makes me excited too that we're in an adoption process for math. And the final thing, I was at Normal Park today, and you guys, the first graders at Normal Park appeared to me more mature than any first graders I've ever seen. The way they were engaged with their math lesson was remarkable. And I mean, we're all in schools a lot, but there is something wiser and more mature. They were still happy, carefree first graders, don't get me wrong. But there's a resiliency that will come out of last year, and that will pay dividends for future generations. So thanks, that's all.
Mrs. Robinson.
Thank you. Shannon, great job, as always. You do a great job breaking down the data for us, which is so important. I wanted to ask a few questions about the ESSER dollars. I had the opportunity to sit on our state call, or on our legislation calls earlier this year. It feels like a lifetime ago. So with our ESSER timeline to spend, can you remind us, Dr. Towns, on the timeline of these funds and how fast we have to get them out the door?
Yes, so ESSER 3 runs through fiscal year in 2024, which for us would normally be June 2024, but the federal government goes through September 30th. So in our minds, my guess would be we can encumber and use those funds through the end of the calendar year, because typically we're able to encumber through the end of that calendar year 2024.
Okay. And Summer Reach, I believe, is part of the legislation that required all districts to provide a summer program. So are dollars for the REACH program in our ESSER budget, or is that funded separately?
So it is in our ESSER budget.
Okay.
So we have about $18 million. You'll see the after school and on the detailed budget that you all have. The after school and summer reach dollars are there for the next 2 summers through 2024, right, to get us there. And then this past year, there was also some dollars that the state provided, that came out of some of the TANF dollars and some other buckets, but we funded anticipating if we don't get any additional dollars from the state that we can use the ESSER funds to continue that work.
Okay. I am wondering if we'll come to the end of the school year and realize that we actually need a couple more years of this summer program, or especially the fact that we're already seeing quarantine situations, and it's tricky. I'm interested to see what happens on the state level for sure with that. And then, yeah, or every year. I agree with you. And then we do have an annotation on this ESSER slide, and it says the district received $2.6 million for IDA and $12 million for public health and other ARP grants, which reduce need for ESSER expenditures in the areas of unique needs of special populations and public health coordination. I was just wondering, are we thinking about doing something different with that $1.1 million? Like, are we shifting that money, or is it do you know what I'm talking about on the slide?
Yeah, so
Okay.
the monies that are allocated on that slide are budgeted in ESSER.
Okay.
But we thought, just from a quick eye chart look, it might look like we're not spending any money on
Oh, I
the unique
see.
needs of special
Okay.
populations or on public health. But in fact, when we got this additional grant from the American Rescue Plan, we shifted dollars out of the ESSER budget into that budget that could only be spent on exceptional education. And similarly, this $12 million grant that we got for public health, we shifted all of those dollars into the $12 million grant. And there were a couple of other areas, like the Innovative High Schools grant
Okay.
that we got, that was $2 million. So anytime that we find an opportunity for a different funding source, really what it's allowed us to do is put more money into facilities in the ESSER grant.
Okay, and my last question actually is about facilities. Does ESSER define how we have to spend that money on facilities? Is it specific elements of facilities? It's not just blanket, correct?
Yeah, it's not. And we do have to connect it to the pandemic response, and we do have to get actual pre-approval
Okay.
around the facilities projects that we have in mind, and then there's a final approval. The other point that we'll make is that you have to be in the building by August of 2024. So if we're going to use ESSER dollars, we need to start
Yeah.
the projects.
Okay.
CSLA, of course, is underway. We easily make that time frame. But for the Tyner project, we need to make sure that we're going to make that time frame. And of course, the argument that we're making is that Tyner can't be renovated to support better ventilation, to support physical distancing for the next pandemic that hopefully we won't have. So all of that said, the recommendation from this facilities assessment is that that building needs to be a newly constructed building. So that's what we're proposing to the state.
So
for
we
our
would
budget.
need to build that building in 27 months from now, like have it open in 27
Correct.
months.
It needs to be, students need to be going to school in that building in August of 2024.
I wish I had development projects that move that fast, but
36.
is that 35 months? Okay, that's even better. That's
Mhm.
good. Okay. That had me worried. Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Walker?
Thank you, sir. In regards to the ESSER funds, and just something that I always want to, that I've seen year in and year out, is we get a grant or we get this or that, and then we hire some positions, and then in 3 years, and I noticed in here, we've noted some of these have a time frame on them, and they're going to be done at 2024, 2023. I want us to be cautious for whomever's on this board and whomever is leading this system, that when we get to 2024, if we decide that we don't have this 20-something million dollars, that we're making plans ahead of time versus the school board or the county commission being the bad guys when we say, we're not increasing taxes or things like that. I just hope the thought is put into there, because there's some great positions in here that I believe are needed. So I just urge everybody to be cautious that in 2024 we make plans that we're not sitting here with this big group of people that we may have to change around or let go. So just hope that we're thinking that way.
No, it's a great point, and I will point out that for the fiscal year 22 budget, we continue to update our 3-year strategic financial plan. So there has been what we've communicated to you all. You may have noticed this year when we did the 3-year strategic financial plan, we are bringing in funds and stepping down the reliance on ESSER funds and or sunsetting some of these positions. So we do have a 3-year outlook. We're already planning in terms of with growth dollars that we typically experience from property tax and sales tax. We've been fortunate in Hamilton County that economically we've been growing. And so with those projections, then we're able to anticipate where we need to step down funds. So to your point, no fiscal cliff. We are planning and looking out 3 years for when these funds are going away.
Thank you.
Mr. Perez?
And sorry, just a technical question. If the ESSER funds require a fulfillment of 2024 in the building, do those go into a liability until that is fulfilled? And I'm just thinking, I've never seen a balance sheet necessarily, and I'm just thinking the fact that a future board or anybody, if somehow we don't achieve some goal, may be left with a debt to pay, and so that's.
Mr. Perez, what are you asking? Are we obligated?
I'm asking about a balance sheet
that-
question here, and that's why it's a little bit of a
I think
technical
I'm-
question.
or-
Go for it.
I think what you're asking is, say that we put this $25 million into Tyner in August 2024, the building's not ready.
In the worst case scenario, yeah.
Then yes, we're in trouble. And I think that's why we're pressing and
Yeah.
why Ms. Jones has
Because
put
otherwise
that-
it's a liability that we have to pay off however the terms may be of
Correct.
that, so.
And 35 months seems like a long time, but
Yeah.
planning, breaking
You got
ground, and
that.
getting in, it
Yeah.
takes a minute. And so that's why the amended item on the board agenda tonight, asking to go ahead and go through the process of getting an architect on board so that when additional funding comes available, we're shovel-ready and can go. I mean, if we've got 24 months, it's a very doable thing. But if
Mhm.
we're at 24 months and don't have an architect and don't have plans, then that's not
Well,
realistic.
and so for me, just a note is that aspect that, I mean, I'm taking it, the ESSER funds don't become part of our assets until we are in the building.
No, but with the ESSER funds, we can, Dr. Towns, make amendments to it. So if we get to the point where we realize
That's
Tyner's not
what
going to
we
be
use
ready,
it for.
we can
okay.
take that 25 and put it into
Distribute.
accelerating student achievement
That's right.
or
Okay,
something else.
all right, that
I think
gives me.
I think you were also asking if it'll sit on our balance sheet as a liability until the building is opened, correct? Okay. Did you get that answer?
I feel
Oh, okay.
comfortable enough.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions or discussion around this? Thank you, Ms. Moody. Thank you, Dr. Towns. All right, before we get to our voting items on tonight's agenda, we do have the board disclaimer statement. If anyone feels they need to make that statement, you can do so now.
Go for it.
Go ahead, Mr. Perez.
I declare that I have a spouse and sisters-in-law who work for the school system, and that the board's vote on many, many things may have an effect on my relatives' employment. Even so, I hereby certify that I will cast my vote in the best interest of the school system.
Mr. Walker.
This will be my first time I declare that I have a relative who works for the school system and that the board's vote on may have an effect on my relative's employment. Even so, I hereby certify that I will cast my vote in the best interest of the school system.
Thank you, Mr. McClendon.
I declare I have a fiance who works for the school system, and the board's vote on budgets, policies, etc. may have an effect on my relative's employment. Even so, I hereby certify that I will cast my vote in the best interest of the school
Is the
system.
fiance a relative?
Almost.
Mrs. Thurman.
Yes, I declare that I have a relative who works for the school system and that the board's vote on budget and policies may have an effect on my relative's employment. Even so, I hereby certify that I will cast my vote in the best interest of the school system.
Mrs. Robinson.
I declare that I have a relative who works for the school system and that the board's vote on budget and policy may have an effect on my relative's employment. Even so, I hereby certify that I will cast my vote in the best interest of the school system.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
You got those, Mrs. Ford?
Yes, sir.
All right, any items that we might want to pull and take a look at?
Uh,
Go ahead, Mrs. Thurman.
I would like to pull, it is 5A, 1B, or A, 5A, I guess A, 5B, 5B1, that's it.
Okay.
Is that the ratification of U.S. Department of Education teachers?
Yes.
Leaders in the program?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ratification of grant submission approval.
Okay. Anyone else?
And then I have one more.
Okay.
I just have a question about the request for new position for the HCS Foundation. That is C2. Oh, that's under board matters. Never mind. So that's it.
All right. Anything else? Okay, Mrs. Ford.
Mrs. Hill? Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes. Okay, Mrs. Thurman.
Okay, I was just looking at the amount of this grant, and this is a 50-50 matching grant. I saw that it had emergency approval, which I always have a problem with when this is talking about this amount of money. And the money was moved around, it looks like. It says the grant requires a 50% match, or $1,175,943.17 each year for a 3-year performance period. The matching funds will be repurposed from funding previously allocated to various teacher stipends and 30 held teaching positions. This funding will aid in the district's ongoing efforts to develop great teachers and great leaders. I guess my problem with this is, first of all, the amount of money that's being moved around, and then 30 held teaching positions. Where were those 30 teaching positions that we're taking the money away from? Am I reading that correctly?
Yes,
To
so
match this grant?
for our Grow Your Own programs, we are looking to hold positions. And so we might hold one teaching position, but put 2 residents in that teaching position. And that's part of our opportunity culture model for Grow Your Own.
Well, I guess the problem I have is I know that there are some schools that are told that they can't have another program because we don't have money for another teaching position. And then I see now there's money for teaching positions and we've taken it and reallocated it for something else. So I just...
So let me make sure we're clarifying.
Okay.
These are positions that exist. They're not new positions. So in the opportunity culture model and Grow Your Own, particularly our partnership with Project Inspire, what they've asked is that instead of us filling a position with a teacher, we would take that position and instead hire 2 Project Inspire residents. So they get essentially what's the equivalent of a $12,000 a year stipend, and it helps us to be able to hire the clinical instructor. So what the schools who opt into the opportunity culture are saying is that they will volunteer to take one of their teaching positions to instead train 2 residents. And so that just becomes a 1-for-1 trade. So it's not that we're creating any new positions or
Well, I
any
realize
extra
that. That's what I
dollars.
said. It says they're going to take the money from those 30 teaching positions. Is this money coming out of just our general fund? Where's the money coming from to pay for this, our part?
It's general fund.
Yes.
We pay about $1 million today in teacher leadership stipends in various sundries, from building, building technology, department chairs, grade level chairs. So those are all teacher leadership roles that we're redesigning what teacher leadership looks like as a part of this grant.
Okay, I see it said it was says emergency approval was received for this grant, which is due August the 13th, 6 days prior to the next board meeting. I guess I have a problem. This is another one of those things that it almost was like we didn't get it in time. We've done this on several things that we had to have emergency approval on. This is just a lot of money to have emergency approval on, that we didn't have some discussion about it. It's already been done now, so there you go. But Was it just not done in a timely manner? Was it, we didn't get the grant till, I mean, I don't understand how it gets to be so late in the game of something of this. I mean, this is a $7 million deal here. So,
I'm happy to speak to that. Oftentimes what happens with these grants is that the window will actually open and close, and we haven't had a board meeting in time. And so this is really just approval for us to be able to apply for it. And of course, we're seeking your approval because of the matching funds. This isn't a guarantee that we'll actually even receive this grant, so.
okay. All right, thank you.
All right, do we, Ms. Thurman, you want to take any action on that?
No,
Hold on.
just, I move that we add it on since it's just to apply for the grant. So I
Okay.
moved it.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
I think Mr. McClendon was first on the punch there. All right, Mrs. Ford?
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Don't like getting rid of the 30 teaching positions, no.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes. All right. That should bring us down to board matters then. Our first item would be the disciplinary hearing authority. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Perez.
Thank you.
All right, any question or comment on this item? Okay, Mrs. Ford?
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes. Next item was the request for funding for athletics and performing arts. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion, question about that?
I
Mr.
mentioned
Smith.
it the other night, and we'll mention it again. I just want to make sure that's communicated, you know, for people to be able to apply. Because I talked to a music teacher today that seemed to know nothing about this, so I don't know what we need to do, but just make sure it's communicated that people are going to have the opportunity to apply.
I'll get with Cody tomorrow and see if we can send something out to every teacher. Right now, we're relying on school level administrators and
Yeah,
athletic
and
directors
all
to,
of that.
right. So.
Okay, anything else? Okay, Mrs. Ford.
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes. Next item would be the School Resource Officer Program Agreement between Hamilton County Schools and the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions around that item? Okay, Mrs. Ford.
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes. Next item would be the request for 1 exceptional education pre-K teacher and 2 exceptional education pre-K assistants. We have a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, any discussion, questions? Go ahead, Mrs. Thurman.
Is this the one because Siskin was not going to do this? I just want to make sure everybody understands what's going on. Siskin used to take care of this, and now we're bringing it back in-house. Okay.
Okay, anything else? All right, Mrs. Ford.
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes, next item would be the approval of revisions to the memorandum of understanding between the Hamilton County Schools and the HCEA. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All right, discussion, questions on that item?
So I think
Go ahead, Mr. President.
I think it's valuable to, because people will see that and have questions about it. So just to give a brief explanation as to what it is that we're amending there.
Sure. So we're actually removing the 15-year experience cap for experienced new hires into Hamilton County Schools. We are adding the language that the board adjusted in the OJI policy so that our employees are included in that piece. We're also adding the language of the waiver of the waiting period for certified employees for benefits. And we also removed the sick leave bank to show that we now have short-term disability instead. And we also notated and removed to indicate that sabbatical leave is unpaid. So.
All right, anyone else? Okay, Mrs. Ford.
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Sermon?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes. Next item would be the request for the Hamilton County Schools Foundation Executive Director. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes. Did we approve this foundation? Did we have to approve this foundation? I don't remember whether we ever approved it or not. Did we approve it?
No, it's a separate organization.
It's a separate organization. Okay, why do we have to approve the director? And another question too, while we're doing that is, have they collected any money so far? If we don't have a director, who's in charge of it? Where is it? Is it in with our money, or does it have a separate account? You know, I just don't know what's going on here.
I can answer the first question.
Okay.
So, in order for the school system to pay for benefits for someone, for a support organization like this, they have to be employed. Tennessee law allows a support organization for a school system to exist and share employees under very tight circumstances. So this is proper. That's why this person's employed. It enables the foundation to go out and get someone and maybe offer better benefits than if they were having to shell out of their own pocket. So that's the answer to the first question. The other questions I don't know.
I think if I remember them, the foundation has recently transitioned under my piece of the organizational umbrella. It was previously under Dr. Jill Levine.
Okay. So, is the money being held in Hamilton County Schools? Is it under who? No?
A board member or members have the financial, permissions. It's not anybody that's on our payroll, so that we can keep things separate.
Foundation board. You
We
mean
wouldn't
foundation?
Foundation board. I'm so sorry. Yes, to
Foundation
clarify.
board, but they don't have a chairman.
Yes. The foundation, the Hamilton County
No,
Schools
they have,
Foundation.
the board has a chairman. I sat on that board. They have a chairman, but
I mean a
we
director,
don't have
I'm
a
sorry.
director yet.
I'm sorry, they have a
And
chairman.
I don't remember the figure, one of y'all probably do, but there's already some money.
Yeah, I know there's some money there,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying, I just don't know. Okay, without a director, I just wondered,
And
who's in
that
charge of
that
the money?
director, at the end of the day, is going to raise their own salary, in the grants and the fundraising and that. So it's not going to be any cost to us at all. That person is going to be valuable in a lot of ways.
That's correct.
Okay, I was just wondering.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yeah, I guess, just really like the logistics behind what we're approving is really that the foundation is going to reimburse us for the person's salary monthly, their salary and benefits, okay? And I just wanted to clarify with Scott, like, we can have a intercompany transfer like that with a foundation. Like, there are no issues with how the federal government will recognize the foundation or any type of impact that we would see. So I've set up a foundation before, and it felt to me like when I was setting it up, like this was actually tricky. I totally am relying you on guiding us through this.
It is tricky, but there's actually a statute that allows the school system to have an employee.
So specifically, school systems can actually do an intercompany transfer, basically.
And you mentioned, federal government issues. I'll be perfectly honest. When you start talking about taxes, that's where we would need to have the foundation and the lawyers who sit at the foundation answer those questions. as it concerns the Hamilton County Board of Education, it's entirely proper under these, under the School Support Organization Financial Accountability Act for this board to have an employee who is working with the foundation.
Okay.
If there are any tax concerns for the foundation, that's something that the foundation needs to.
No, what I didn't know was that there was that there was language for school systems to do this, so
Yes, ma'am.
that's helpful. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Perez?
So I've worked with many development directors, and I have seen development directors that raise multiple times their salary, and I've seen development directors that don't raise the water that they're required to, right? And so there's a lot of concern. I didn't know till Monday that this, well, till I got the agenda, that this position would come under Hamilton County. I understand the issue of benefits. I understand the issue of protection around it. But the oversight is my bigger concern, in that if, for whatever reason, it takes months, by the way, for a development director to get the traction, and so that usually even up to 2 years, and so usually you don't find out till it's a little too late that the person may have been unable to do the job with excellence. So that whole thing, knowing that we're paying it until we get reimbursed, or are we already guaranteed the reimbursement and we're just covering those expenses?
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
if ever there's a lag, what happens?
So the dollars are already at the foundation to cover this annual
This
salary.
full position
Right,
for
exactly.
a year?
Yes, this year.
Okay.
And so, and the foundation does have a board. The chair of the board is actually Keith Fogelman, who was our former chief talent officer. And so we have a lot of confidence in him that he is going to manage this person to expectations. And of course, you know, we've already got some relationships that we're ready to cultivate. We just don't have anybody who's full-time on the foundation development side. So this allows for that person to go out and actually pursue some of the relationships that we already have.
Okay. So the other, and I commented on this on Monday, and I think, again, it's just one of those things to throw on there as an expectation down the road. But, and again, I'm calling it a development director because that's being one person of a foundation. That's their job, is to go raise money all day long. My experience on those development directors that have been able to raise into the millions of dollars is that they get paid very, very well. Otherwise, they get taken right away because everybody sees their capacity to get paid, to raise money exceptionally well. And I think one thing, because it will fall under Hamilton County's payroll, I think we need to keep in mind that it's very possible they'll have to increase even above. I mean, I know development directors that get paid above the executive director of their, and even the pay structures can be different based on some metrics that they need to meet and so on and so forth. And all that to say, that's kind of what worries me about this. Maybe not year one, but down the road, this can become incredibly complicated as we have an entity under another entity, but we don't supervise that entity. There's a different board, and I just want to warn us about that down the road.
Yes, that's a great point. And Keith and I actually talked about this the other day, and he's talking with other foundations to see how theirs is structured as well, so that once this development director gets on board and is able to raise funds, that they can move to another structure and maybe move them directly to the foundation. But this just gives them a jump start.
Mr. Walker?
Yes, just to be clear, and I know it says new position, so this organization doesn't currently have an executive director. And to make it more attractive, we're offering to do the benefits and the salary and then get reimbursed by the foundation. And then the main purpose of the foundation, if you could just briefly, it doesn't have to belabor it.
Sure. Jen, do you want to?
It's to obviously go out and, as Board Member Perez said, raise funds in order to support our strategic plans. So it's to just wrap around certain initiatives that we see as key to reaching those Focus 5 and the goals that we've laid out in Future Ready 2023. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Dr. Dunn.
It was kind of birthed as a result of, we really didn't have a mechanism for, if I'm some kind of corporation or maybe even an individual or a church or whatever that wanted to make a donation to the Hamilton County Department of Ed, there really wasn't a mechanism to do that. And we have our annual, I forgot the name of the groups, you'll have to help me, the Kids First, that was a system-wide fundraiser that's done very well. But other than that, we really didn't have an initiative for people to come in and, at the end of the year, I want to save some money on my taxes, so I'm going to give some funds to Hamilton County Department of Ed. It didn't exist. So that was kind of how all this was birthed. And I don't see a bad downside at all. And I think sometimes we make much ado about things about nothing. Because you got that board that's led by Keith Fogelman, who we all trust and love, and a lot of good people on that board. I'd like to think I'm one of them. And we're going to make sure that the person that we hire is going to meet the expectations that we set. So that's all I'll say. It's a good thing.
Mrs. Hill.
I just want to share with my fellow board members, they've already been doing some good work. Brown Academy has been in the Rock Point Learning Community, and it is part of District 6. And they had a reimagining of that school, because you all may remember from the MGT report, it is one of our best buildings. It's the only building in my district that doesn't have a leaking roof. Yay. Yay for Brown, not for everybody else. But in the reimagining of some of that approach to learning at Brown Academy, there was a whole redo of their library area to make it like a STEAM lab, and they were able to raise funds to be able to get new furniture and the 3D printers. It's just a remarkable space, and really encourage you guys to go take a look at it. But that's because of the foundation. So good things already.
And I would add to that too, another example is that we had a donor that really wanted to provide some incentive funding for Students for Summer Reach and for the My Minutes Matter initiative. So we were able to give out attendance incentives to Students for Summer Reach. And then when students hit certain milestones for My Minutes Matter. So that was a real success, and that was all because of the foundation.
I promise I'll shut up.
Mr. Thurman, go ahead.
No, I didn't have a problem with the foundation per se. I just don't know what legally, as we have heard, about, I don't want us to get hung in with something if they don't raise enough money one year and they've extended, because they have no idea how much money they're going to make, or anything like that. I just don't want the board to have to be on the hook for any of that.
Mr. Press.
So yeah, kind of to repeat the same statement, I'm all for the foundation. I think I've mentioned to Ms. Murray that I can't go to Target or Walmart or any place without being asked, do you want to round this up? I can't wait till somebody says, do you want to round this up for public schools? And we have millions of dollars flowing, because I'm sure the community will respond and say, absolutely, if it's for public schools, we'll round this up. And so I'm excited. And well, no, I won't say what I was going to say. But I think there's great things to round this up in our schools. So there's no question about it. To me, this was new to know that they were still going to be under Hamilton County, and just the logistics and direction and all that. I want us to be very careful that we're not making any mistake along the way. I also don't know personally. Yes, I do. I was going to say I don't know too many foundations, but they're usually family foundations that are already endowed that can run on one person, because it requires a lot of little details to get that donation, to register that donation, to make sure. So we have to be aware that this foundation, in order to get to that point where we're rounding up at every grocery store and convenience store in Hamilton County and beyond, let's go. But in order to get there, this has to be staffed well. And I, years ago, pulled all the 990s of our local private schools to see how much they were raising, to see, and they're in the tens of millions of dollars. And there's no reason why the thousands of alumni, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of alumni that have graduated through here, many of whom have been incredibly financially successful, shouldn't want to give to support our schools. So I look forward to it. I'm just looking at the logistics of the whole thing, and my brain starts, short-circuiting in that process. So keep that clear.
Yep, and I'll just reiterate what Ms. Murray said, that the long-term goal is certainly to have the executive director to be there, an employee of the foundation.
All right, anything else? Okay, Mrs. Ford?
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes. Next item are the classified salary increases. Oh,
Can I say one
sorry.
thing?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
At what point will we know whether they have enough money to pay, or are you gonna come back to the board and say they're now self-sufficient and they're gonna be their employee and not ours? At what point will we be made aware of that as soon as that happens?
Yep, so I'll just reiterate that so long as they remain our employee, the reimbursement would happen on the front end and not on the back end. But then as soon as we're able to make them an employee of the foundation, we'll of course update the board to that effect. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so next item there, the classified salary increases. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Go ahead, Mrs. Thurman.
Yes, I just want to be sure, we talked about this the other night, Penny, about working on the pay scale. I just want everybody to be aware that you have someone looking at the pay scale, because
Yes,
we do
ma'am.
realize there are some of our employees who've been employees for 20, 25 years, not making as much as some of our new hires, and that cannot stand. So we are working on that. I just want people to be aware of that.
Correct. Our existing employees are at the top of the pay scale, so they're maxed out.
They're
So if they've
maxed
been
out,
here
right.
25 years, they're not exactly making the same as new hires, but they're not anywhere where they should be either. So we do have a compensation consultant who will be reviewing our classified pay scale and helping us readjust that, because that's a priority. We need to take care of it.
Well, I did have some that sent me what they were making and what new hires were making, so anyway, I can talk to you about that later.
Sure,
Okay.
yeah, and each of those we've reached out to, but everyone should have moved up to at least $13. And this proposal tonight will take existing employees who have been here prior to August of 2020 up 2 steps, which is an additional 50 cents for most folks.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anything else there? Okay, Mrs. Ford.
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes. Next item is the COVID leave for 2021, 2022. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All right, Mr. Walker and then Mr. McClendon.
I need just a little more clarification. I tried to watch the agenda meeting, but just, I want to be cautious that if we send teachers home for tracing or all of those things, that they are protected if they, so I apologize for not being here on Monday to hear the details, but I'd like to hear that one more time, please.
Sure, so what we're proposing is at least 5 days of COVID leave if an unvaccinated teacher is quarantined. If a vaccinated teacher has symptoms or tests positive, then they would also have to go home. So this would provide 5 days of COVID leave for them as well, with some criteria, as long as they contact the COVID call center and they partner with them in regards to testing and other protocols as well, so.
Versus them using this is going to be an
Versus them
addition.
using their sick leave,
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Mr. McClendon.
Kind of in the same vein, I'm glad that we're doing 5 days. Quarantine, if I'm correct, is 10 days, correct, for teachers if they meet that criteria that's listed?
Yep, so it's 10 days with the opportunity to test out of quarantine if you receive a negative test result on day 5 or later, and so then you could return on day 8, which means you would be out for 7. Theoretically, 2 of those days are a weekend, so 5 days should cover it if you're willing to be tested out.
Gotcha. So my issue with this, and it's kind of small, but 5 days isn't really enough, especially for our new teachers. We have first year, second year, and probably some third year teachers that don't have enough sick days to cover this, and it's no fault of their own if they have to quarantine or get COVID or whatever the circumstance is. And if I'm a first year teacher, second year teacher, that kind of puts a burden on them that I don't necessarily want them to have. So just thinking through this and kind of counting weekends and how time frame, I'm going to make a motion that we make this 7 days instead of 5 days, and that should give us more cover, especially for quarantine teachers, and gives them a little more room to breathe on that. No, instead of having 5 days, they would have 7 days that they could potentially use. So if they have to quarantine on a Wednesday, they're getting 2 extra days that they don't have to use their sick days from. And I just think that that's fair to our teachers, especially to all of our teachers, but especially our new teachers, that they have that kind of peace of mind that they don't have to burn through their sick days, because life still happens in a pandemic. And so making sure we take that burden off of them.
So before we move forward here, so Mr. Bennett, do we have a substitute motion here? Is
So
that
that's
what
a
we have?
motion to amend.
Motion to
So
amend.
Motion to amend.
so
All right,
we-
so we'll continue with our discussion here.
You
and then
need a
come-
second.
Second.
All right. So I had next Mrs. Thurman, then Ms. Hill, then Mrs. Ross.
Okay, I would need some clarification. Are the teachers being treated differently on this? The vaccinated and the unvaccinated, are they being treated differently in this?
So the CDC does treat them differently in regards to who's quarantined and
No,
who's not quarantined.
I'm not worried
so-
about CDC. These are our rules.
Mhm.
So are they being treated differently? If so, how?
So we are saying that unvaccinated teachers, if they wish to utilize the leave, that they would say that they would be subject to weekly or routine testing.
And also, Ms. Thurman, vaccinated teachers might not have to quarantine at all, depending upon
Correct.
the circumstances. So the status of whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated may drive whether you need to quarantine in the first instance. That's not something that we can help. That's just CDC policy.
So even though people who are vaccinated can spread the virus, as we know,
So if, once they're symptomatic, they would have to quarantine, right? So what this policy applies to is, in part, if you reach a point where you have to quarantine, forget whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, if you have to quarantine pursuant to CDC policy, then this board policy would apply to you and give you certain protected leave days so you don't have to burn your own sick leave days. Is that a good, simple way to put it, Ms. Murray?
Yes, that's correct.
So we're not worried how you get into the quarantine. If CDC tells you got to go, we're going to take care of you. That's a layman's way to look at this policy.
I just don't want teachers to be punished whether if they're vaccinated or not vaccinated. I don't like that, because
Sure.
that's completely and totally up to them.
And if someone is vaccinated and they go into quarantine, they're entitled to the benefits of this policy. And if they're unvaccinated and they go into quarantine, they're entitled to the benefits of this policy. Now, as Ms. Murray, you probably need to...
The length of time, the amount of days they would have to take.
Right, but which gets back to, I think, one of the points that Mr. McClendon was making. By extending the board's coverage, you're going to protect somebody who maybe isn't vaccinated because they can't be or they don't want to be. You're giving them that extra time so that, as Ms. Bronson pointed out, they can test out of the quarantine.
Okay.
That make sense? So Mr. McClendon's motion's effectively trying to give
Yeah,
those teachers room. Is that a fair way to put your motion?
Yeah, I understand that, and I thought about the same thing too, except I was thinking 6 days, you said 7. So, but that's okay too.
And the teachers, new teachers that don't have a bank of sick days. I
And-
think that's very important. I appreciate
Yeah,
you saying
that's
that.
right. And then two, something that Joe brought up at the agenda session, we have had reports of people that's supposed to be quarantining, putting boats in waters, where they're supposed to be on quarantine. I say if a teacher's caught doing that they get docked the pay, or maybe even worse. And I don't know what we do about that, but there needs to know that there will be, if there are pictures that surface of a teacher that's supposed to be in quarantine, because it seems like some teachers sometimes get quarantined more than others, and if they're out doing other things besides quarantining like they should, that there has to be some recourse.
And Ms. Thurman, that's a great point. So some of the bold language at the top of the second page talks about if you're on quarantine, and there's work that they can assign you, you need to be ready and able to do it. So if you're sick and you can't, then you can't. But if you're able, I mean, there's a lot of work that can be done. If you're a classroom teacher and you have students with IEPs, there are all kinds of reports that can be filled out for those kids. So to your point, I think what the administration is trying to do is make use of the downtime.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Hill.
Thank you, Chair. So it's interesting, I think the perception of this definitely could go both ways, because to your point, Rhonda, people who are unvaccinated likely will be in quarantine more often and could be putting boats in water, to use your phrase, whereas people who are vaccinated will likely not quarantine as often and therefore be in the building teaching students. So that there is a there's a friction point here. Something that has been elevated to me from school staff is a concern about what if their child who cannot be vaccinated then has to quarantine. And so, there comes a point where we can only go so far with what we offer to our employees in terms of benefits. But given that that Tucker has raised this idea of adding some days to it, I wonder, and I'd like to hear from you, Penny, I wonder if might we be able to expand this, that that same employee would be able to use this if their student of Hamilton County Schools were required to be quarantined. Because you're going to have parents who are vaccinated who might not ever need to use this leave, but it's sitting out there for 7 days for them, but they have to go home because their first grader got quarantined that was not able to be vaccinated. What's your thought on that?
Yes, and previously last year it did cover dependents. This year when we first drafted it, we were thinking to protect the employee first, to make sure that they were covered in their situations. But, I'll defer to Scott. That's definitely up to the board as to, any amendments of that nature. So,
I could see how it could add substantially to the cost to the system to do that. But I could understand how there would be teachers who might cry foul after this, that, listen, I did everything I could to protect myself and my ability to teach by getting vaccinated, and my colleague that didn't gets time off and I don't.
Sure.
Because they've been asked to quarantine. Well, I mean, Rhonda, you're talking about boats and water, so, I think.
That was a fact. There was a picture
Well, I
of
mean,
somebody
I'm
putting a boat in
not
the water.
questioning that it is not a fact, but I'm
Okay.
saying, you're chuckling when I'm saying these things, but you're saying the same thing just with different examples. So, there's a friction point about this. So, something that may, perhaps after we have a little more conversation and we vote on Tucker's, we can think about if we want to do an additional amendment.
Mr. Smith.
I said this the other night, and I got criticized on social media for saying that. I know that 99.9% of our teachers would never do this. I mean, they just wouldn't. But there's 1% that would, and I've seen it. Some of you guys have seen it happen. It's happening right now. So, Scott, help me understand, what happens to that 1% or 1/10 of 1%? Because 99% of our teachers are not gonna take advantage, but there are those that will. So what happens to those that do, and their supervisor finds out about that? What recourse do they have?
Well, it depends on the position that they have. It depends on whether they've misrepresented that they were under quarantine. Depends on whether they failed to comply with the quarantine rules. If they've done that, if they failed to comply with quarantine rules, or they've refused to perform work, that's insubordination. There's an entire section of the Tennessee Code on how the superintendent can deal with that. So if someone refuses available work, there are consequences.
Mrs. Thurman.
Yes, about teachers taking off for their children. You know, people all over Hamilton County are having to miss work when kids are out of school. When we quarantine kids, the parents are having to take off from work. They don't get any compensation for that. I mean, if it's the employee, it's one thing, but we cannot do this because they expect the parents to pay a teacher to be off for their child when they don't get any compensation for theirs. If it's the teacher being off, it's one thing, but I mean, if it's their child, just like everyone else in Hamilton County, if they have another job, I guess they just have to find a sitter or find someone to watch their children.
That's actually almost
because-
exactly what I said to the people when I when they brought it to me.
Yeah.
Because I feel this friction with it as well.
Yeah, and so I was thinking the cost. I can't imagine what the cost would be, or how many more teachers would be out of the classroom that we don't need necessarily, but that's just my thoughts.
All right. Anything else there? So, right now we have a motion and a second to add Mr. McClendon's amendment, right?
Correct. Motion to amend. It's
Yep.
been moved and seconded.
Yep. And so we're ready to vote. Okay, Mrs. Ford.
Mrs. Hill,
No.
Mr. McClendon,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Sermon,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Chairman Wingate.
Yes. All right, next item there would be board policies. I'm sorry, go
We now
ahead.
need to move to the main motion. So this
Oh,
is the
we gotta pay,
motion
that's
to
right.
amend.
So we need to go ahead and pass
Yes,
this
sir.
also. So we already had a motion and a second on that. So go ahead, Mrs. Ford, please.
Mrs. Hill,
Well, if we can, would discussion still be open for that? Because, okay, it would be. Okay, so just for the purposes of just having the vote, I move to amend that this leave, 7 days of leave, potentially, be usable by people for their dependents. That are in quarantine. Yes.
All right, do we have a second on that?
A second.
All right, go ahead, Mrs. Thurman, then Mr. Perez.
That's going to be defined dependent. I mean, you could have an elderly person who lives with you that's dependent on you. I mean, what is dependent? You know, definitely not. Am I right? I mean, there's lots of people who could be dependent. It could be your dependent. So I mean, that just opens up a whole plethora of different things that really add a lot of cost.
Mr. Perez.
So last year, so we're still talking a total of 7 days, right? Whether they use it for themselves or they use it for a dependent. Last year, I just want to understand that. I apologize that I should probably know this. But you're saying last year they had that option if they needed. Can you tell me, I mean, we quarantined a lot last year too. Quarantined
did,
teachers,
yes.
quarantined students, quarantined everybody. So can you just give me an idea of did everybody use up their time? How, like, what was the?
No, not everyone used the COVID leave, of course. I mean, not everyone was quarantined, thank goodness. But it did last year. We kind of followed the general FFCRA rules because initially we had that mandate until December 31st, and then the board generously continued it through the end of the year. And so that law did cover minor dependents at that time. So, And we could define it as such.
Now, the cost to us would be obviously the substitute teacher if they were unable to do any work.
The substitute teacher and then the leave payment. So, you know, in addition to the sub, also whatever their daily rate is for
Yeah, but
leave.
we're paying them anyway, so that wouldn't be, so really we're adding the substitute teacher.
Correct.
Can some of those funds,
No.
or do some of those funds come from ESSER funding because they are for COVID mitigation needs? Have we allocated any of that?
Mary Ellen can speak to that, yes.
Every question's a good question.
I know that last year we did the substitute additional payment was charged. I don't know if ESSER 3, if we put any in ESSER 3 or not.
We hadn't put it in ESSER 3 at this point. Of course,
Mhm.
we can amend the budget at any time, you know, as we see.
So if we
how
see
much
that
is
that's an
utilized.
increase, that this has become a need, I mean, we've got a reality of a variant that seems to be hitting children and families in ways that we wish it wasn't, and that are already requiring a lot of, did I see 1,000 students quarantine? You know, and obviously a lot of teachers have their own children in the school system. So in the event that we see a increase in cost because of that, potentially we could amend the budget to cover that increase in cost. Okay, that's all.
Mrs.
Chairman.
Robinson and then Mrs. Thurman.
I had a clarifying question if I could. I know that federal law required us to cover dependents through the end of last calendar year. My recollection was that the board covered employees through the end of the school year. Did we extend that benefit to dependents as well?
We did. We
Okay,
continued
all
the
right.
same coverage.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to point out, I mean, specifically why I'm in support of supporting the change that Janice proposed is because at the end of the day, whenever, I mean, you're going to have teachers that are going to be out, it's going to be the same cost to our budget for substitutes to be in those classrooms whenever they have students that quarantine. And so I mean, it's just really simple to me. Like, it just makes sense to go ahead and just create a bright spot with this, this policy, which is, hey, also extend it to their either students or their dependents. We could define the students, I suppose, a lot more like Rhonda is pointing out. But I mean, just at the end of the day, we're gonna face this, and it's gonna be the same budget cost to us no matter what. That's how I look at it.
Mrs. Thurman.
Something's been lost in all this. What is going to be the cost to the students that are losing out on their teacher? I mean, this is why we're here. As for the teachers to be in the classroom as much as they possibly can, because this is what they missed out. We keep comparing it to last year. Well, last year we saw how the grades were affected by teachers not being in the classroom, students not being in the classroom, and yet we're going to try to make a way for teachers to maybe be out of the classroom even more. What does that cost? It's not just a monetary cost. It's because, you know, we're told how much a child misses a day of school, how much learning that they miss, and it's the same way when a teacher's not there. When their classroom teacher's not there, the students miss out. And so there's another cost that has to be figured in there, not just a monetary cost, but a cost that for what the students are missing. So here again, like I said, I don't have a problem with doing it 7 days for teachers if they have to be quarantined, but their students, like I say, everyone else has to find a sitter, and a lot of them don't have any sick days either. They have zero. They used them all up last year. They used all their vacation time up. They've used everything. They have nothing. And so now you're asking their kids to miss out on a day's education plus paying a teacher to be able to stay home with their children. I'm sorry. If I vote against it, it will be for that reason. It's not for this. I would gladly give the 7 days for them to be off, but I don't know why we have to add this other caveat to it.
Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, I get it. I get what you're saying. How do you, I can't find a sitter for my kids whenever they're quarantining though. So only I or my husband can watch them because I can't pay anybody to watch my kids whenever they're quarantining because those people don't want to be exposed. So the parent is absolutely going to be the person that has to quarantine with their child. I mean, it's just going to happen regardless. People are either going to take time off, or again, we can extend an opportunity to now bundle it into these days. And I think that makes our teachers just a slightly bit, stressed. I mean, I get it. I totally agree with you that it's unfortunate for teachers to be out, but it's absolutely going to happen. Like teachers that are parents, if their child goes into quarantine, who else is going to watch their child? I can't pay anybody $100 an hour to watch my kids whenever they're in quarantine. Nobody wants to be exposed to someone in quarantine. So I hear your argument completely, and I empathize with it. I just don't know that it's even, yeah. And vaccinated teachers, we have 70% of them are not out, right? And so, yeah, and so then vaccinated teachers would be able to actually utilize this whenever they have a child quarantining. And I feel like that actually creates a level playing field. I feel like we're kind of getting a little, I realize that either the federal or state side says that you can, or because CDC says that those people don't have to quarantine, you don't have to make the same rule apply to every employee, but I do feel like it's a bit uneven and feels a little messy to me personally if we don't offer the same thing across the board to everyone. But just saying, I just don't know how anybody else is going to quarantine with their child other than the parents. So.
All right.
And this would also, just to be aware, allow them to Zoom into their classes. So they would need to agree to be able to do that as well. So if they're sick, of course, and unable to do so, we wouldn't expect them to. But if they're quarantined and they're not experiencing symptoms, then they should still be able to engage and Zoom in with their classes.
Ms. Hill.
And that was, thank you, Penny, that was actually one of the points that was brought to me today was, if my child is quarantining and they may or may not get sick and hopefully won't get sick, but I would be able to continue teaching remotely. So even though the district still has to pay for a sub, that they could Zoom in at that point. So thanks for bringing that up.
But they wouldn't be taking that leave.
Right,
if
they would
they're
have,
working.
if we were to allow this to be used for dependent minors, like was in the previous year's standard, then a teacher whose child has to be quarantined, perhaps because they are too young to be vaccinated at this point, they would then be able to be at home with them and not take leave time and also be teaching their class from home if they chose to use the leave time benefit.
Correct.
If they didn't want to use the leave time benefit and they didn't feel comfortable teaching from home, then they don't use the benefit. Then they say thanks but no thanks. I'm just going to take sick time. Same as, a teacher who themselves is quarantining. They could say, you know what, I want to go out on a boat, and I'm don't want any kind of benefit, and I'm, I guess, to that point, willing to risk contaminating other people. Anyway.
Ms. Robinson.
I was just going to say, I do think that defining dependent is really important in this, though, if we were to move forward with this. So minor dependent is what I would be supportive of.
Yeah, minor dependent.
Mr. Perez.
What's your intent?
Yes, minor
Okay,
dependent.
So I'm just, probably won't affect the amendment, but if a teacher goes home and Zooms into class, is she taking or he taking this leave?
Yes.
Even though they're teaching full-time? Okay.
Yes.
That
And
helps
that's a
me
way
clarify.
for us to designate it so that we can get a substitute teacher and know that they were not present in the classroom.
But you still have to pay a substitute course.
Yeah, I get that. They gotta still sit in the room. I get it. Okay, thanks. Man, this is complicated.
All right, any other discussion or question about that? So we have Mrs. Hill's motion, correct? In a
Yes.
second? Okay, I think we're ready.
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
No.
Mrs. Thurman?
No.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
No.
5-3.
All right.
5-3, motion to amend carries. So we now move to the main motion.
All right. We're ready, are we ready to vote on the main motion? All right, let's go ahead, Mrs. Ford.
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes. So that brings us to our board policies there. These are all first read, so obviously we're not voting on any of these tonight. Anything there you'd like to talk about before we move on to our next item? Go ahead, Mrs. Thurman.
Yes, the appearances before the board, there's a couple of things here. it says desires to address the board regarding an item on the agenda. Sometimes people want to address the board about something that's not on the agenda. And then too, if you make them speak at the last of the meeting, if it's on the agenda, it's already too late to address it. So I don't know that that clause needs to be, anyone desires to address the board regarding a concern or whatever. It might be a better choice of words there. I don't know. Because not everything that people talk about is something on the agenda. And also down on line 36, it says board meeting shall provide copies of these, the person going to address the board shall have the materials to be shared with the board prior to the board meeting, shall provide copies of these materials to the board secretary no later than 12 o'clock the day of the scheduled board meeting. You know, if you're in Sell Creek and you want to address the board about something, it's a long drive to drive over here to give out materials, to just have to drive back and then come back to the board meeting. And as we see, that sometimes even people that live in this building right over there don't get things in a timely manner to the school board. So I think this is asking a lot. I'm not sure that that is necessary to put that in there. Maybe say provide copies of the materials to the board secretary at the beginning of the meeting or something like that. I don't know why it has to be at 12 o'clock the day of the board meeting. I mean, why is that necessary?
Ms. Thurman, if I could comment on that. So we had put in there, I think it was like close of business the day before, because the assumption was if they were asking to speak, they might have something they wanted to present. And so when they're being contacted and said, yeah, be here, do you have anything you want to share with the board? Yes, here it is. But Ms. Ford's concern was the day before. My thought was, y'all would want to see it as soon as you could, right? So if you're,
I don't know. We get to the board meeting, y'all start throwing things down here I had never seen.
Well,
it's at every board meeting.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so I had originally put that language in there because I thought, if someone wants to take the board's time and present something and they want the board to look at a document, wouldn't it be a good idea if the board had seen the document beforehand so they could help digest what the speaker is saying? So it was really to help the speaker be able to have a more informed audience with the board and to help you get ready for the speaker. So I had thought Wednesday at close of business. Ms. Ford thought that was a little bit of a burden because maybe someone's trying to prepare their presentation and they haven't figured out what they want to do. So the thought here is they email it or fax it or carrier pigeon it, and then she can send it out to y'all
through email. But because sometimes the people that sign up to speak right out here, they haven't had that kind of time to get everything prepared. I don't know. I just don't see that this has ever been an issue. I've been on the board a long time, and this has never been a big issue.
I understand exactly what you're saying. The goal here was to try to make the flow of information a little bit better. But it's a new requirement, and if it's something that the board says, I don't know that's going to work, we don't have to have it in there. But you're right. Sometimes people hand out things, and y'all are seeing it for the first time.
Oh, I voted on the raises for people before they get it at the school board meeting. So
It's really an accommodation for the board and the speaker, but we could take that out.
Yeah. Well, I just don't think that is necessary. Maybe
I'm good.
Present it to the board secretary, but I don't know. It has to be the 12 o'clock.
All right, Mr. Smith.
I brought this up the other night, and I want to bring it up once again. 5 minutes is a long time. It's a long time. And especially in the format that we have where we're not able to ask the presenter any question or ask for clarification. And there's been many times when people have spoke to us that I've wanted to say, can you tell me where that happened or when that happened? And we're not able to do that. I do know that, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeannie, but I think the city council and the commission allows 3 minutes. And we talked about this some the other night. I don't know how we got to 5, but if everybody tonight exercises their 5 minutes, we're going to be here 75 minutes. It's a long time. So I really want us to think about, is 5 minutes too long? And looking at 3 minutes. Now, I want to hear from everybody. Anybody's got something to say has a right to come right there. and I want to hear from them. But I just question if 5 minutes is too long.
Go ahead, Ms. Stern.
Yeah, we talked also the other night, on Monday night, about having a session where parents could come and address the board and we could interchange with you all, which I think is probably a really good idea. And maybe they could come and, tell us what's on their mind, at a school board meeting, and then have another time where we could just interact with them.
Absolutely.
And do that. I think that was a great idea by you, Joe, the other night, Joe.
Mr. Walker.
Yes, I think you're right. There's some time when it's 5 minutes can fill up a long time. But we have this meeting once a month. This is for our parents and community members to come and speak. And I know we'll get some. I've been accused of rambling on a lot in my day sometimes. But I think those that'll come up and be succinct and get through their part in 3 minutes will help us out. For those who take every second of the 5 minutes, I think to limit a time, I think 5 minutes is a fair amount of time for somebody that gets one shot a month to come and speak to us. And also, in our forum, when we were looking at this appointment, we talked about the idea of maybe individually, or myself going out individually in our district and have that monthly meeting where you can just have coffee and sit around and talk a little bit. It may not be perfect for everybody else. There has to be that piece. But I think for our purposes, 5 minutes is an appropriate amount of time.
All right.
Was that taken out? It looks like it's been marked through anyway on this. Am I correct, Scott? On
It's in the next paragraph.
It's in the next paragraph. Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Mrs. Hill.
Okay.
I support Mr. Smith. I support Joe on that. I think that 3 minutes will give us more time to be able to hear more people potentially. And it is, I like having it at the end of the meeting because that way we can get through the work that we need to do. And I think it's also really useful for the folks that come to the meeting to hear that work and know what's happening. But to Rhonda's point, if you wanted to talk about something on the agenda, yeah, we need to open that language up a little bit. Also, I think, Sherry, you'll be collecting the addresses. I think it would be really cool if on our list of who's going to be coming, if we could have the district noted, just so that we would be able to very easily follow up with people, because I'm glad, James, that you're thinking about meeting with people in your district, because that, to me, is the most useful way. I mean, I spoke with a woman for 2 hours last week about critical race theory and other concerns that she had been brought up here. So she's in my district. She lives in Lookout Valley, and we talked for a long, long time and got to know each other, and that was really useful time. So certainly encourage you to do that, James.
Right. Anything else on that policy?
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question of the board, since this is for first read? I'm curious, Mr. Smith's idea about having a time when it could be more open for discussion. I'd like to explore that with y'all if maybe I could. Is there appetite for maybe having 2 types of public comment? So like maybe public comment at a business meeting to talk about things you're actually going to vote on, so it's restricted to the agenda, versus maybe having a designated work session sometime during the week when it's just wide open public comment and you can have that back and forth. And I'm asking because, and I hate to create another meeting for y'all, but the agenda session y'all have, the Monday before is almost a better time for someone to ask questions of the board so that the administration can put it on the agenda for Thursday. Does that make sense?
I think an agenda session.
I mean, so I'm kind of wondering, I'm asking y'all if y'all have the appetite for that, because if you do, I'll rewrite this for next time.
Mr. McClendon.
That's kind of what I was just thinking through is no reason at our agenda session we can't have a kind of a Q&A, put some parameters on it, 5 minutes or whatever, but it's a Q&A, and then keep all public comment on our Thursday meetings to the agenda.
Take to the agenda.
To the agenda. I'm sure there's an issue or two there that will arise, but I'm just thinking that would give the public time to address the board and for us to hear them out, which is our job, and then us to do official business. And we have someone speaking tonight that's speaking to an agenda item, but they're speaking after we voted on it. So there's a little bit of a double-edged sword there in my end. But I'm good with Mondays if there's some kind of public comment Q&A session with the board. I mean, some of those meetings are 25, 30 minutes anyway. I mean, not that I want to be here any longer, but it's our job and that's what we were elected to do. So I would definitely be for that.
Mrs. Hill.
I would remind my fellow board members that the district offers us a lot of opportunities to talk with people in a very useful way with our learning community advisory boards. I attend those, and I'm able to have an advisory session with teachers where I learn a great deal about what's happening in the Rock Point learning community. And then right after that is one with parents. So it's a time when we already are using our staff to engage with the community around our strategic plan, around concerns that they have. I guess if we were going to have a Q&A session at the agenda meeting, we'd probably need some additional training with you, Scott, on what we are and aren't able to discuss or do. I mean, and that's not a conversation for now, but I'd want to understand that better about, you know, where sunshine falls and how things get, if we're discussing things. Anyway, I'd want to understand what the parameters are.
Mr. Perez.
No, anyway, yeah, for me, 5 minutes, I'm fine with that. It doesn't, I actually, although 5 minutes may seem a lot to us when we sit here and we listen to many people, it often seems too short for the people who are up there speaking to us. So it's to me, it's okay. So, and I get it, but I'm with Mr. Walker. My family knows that not only do I take this Thursday, but I also come back sometimes in a bad mood, so they don't talk to me the whole evening. So anyways, that's just part of our duties. But anyways, that's fine. I actually like the split if it's possible and it falls within, but I like it just because it allows us to inform some of the conversation, and then to me, it's not an either or. It's you know, I've heard out there. I saw one headline that said the board is trying to limit speakers, and if there was anything that is the opposite to the truth, is we are trying to listen. There are weeks like this week where I receive over 400 phone calls. I wish I could answer 400 400 emails and dozens of phone calls and texts. You know, there comes a point where I just can't physically respond to those people with intention and deliberate purpose, but I like, that's our goal. It's to listen to the community and inform ourselves by the different stakeholders present. So all that to say, there is no intention to limit the community. There's an intention to ensure that it's productive and it moves forward in a way that serves the community better. So so for me, I'm good with, as you're considering, with figuring out. I don't necessarily want to add an extra night, not because again, this is my duty, this is where I'm here, but because I don't know that it would add or take away from anything that we're currently. So for me, if it's on a Monday night, then we meet here on a Thursday, and if we'll have people speak to the agenda items, that's all fine. But I just, at the end of the day, I want people to feel that they had access to the board, that they were able to speak their concerns to the board in a respectful manner. My concern with the agenda thing is, from my understanding, the whole point of part of this policy is that once they start speaking, they'll have more access to say what they want to speak about without us shutting them down if it falls. So I don't know if there's a contradiction there. Did I make sense? So my understanding from this policy is once people start speaking and approach the board, we are limited in what we can ask them to talk about or not talk about due to First Amendment rights.
Basically, yes. So
So-
you can create, once you give them a spot on the agenda, that's their time. And so the limited restriction you have is, what are you going to talk about? That's the limited
So
restriction.
we can restrict
Yes, you
prior
can.
to that?
Yes.
Okay.
So, but by the same token, Mr. Smith's point is a really good point. They want to talk about something that's not on the agenda. What is the vehicle for them being able to address the whole board? I mean, maybe, Mr. Perez is my board member. I can give him a call. I know Rhonda because she cuts my hair. I'm speaking hypothetically. She clearly doesn't cut my hair. It would look different.
She doesn't cut my hair, that's for sure.
So maybe I know a couple of y'all, right? But if I want to address the board as a whole, this is my one opportunity. So listening to y'all talk and thinking, I think the vehicle for that is probably the work session where y'all can work, where you can have the back and forth and you can ask questions, and maybe Mr. Smith is inspired by a concern someone has, and Mr. Smith says, hey, Ms. Murray, can you look into that for us and get back with us, or just send me an email? So that may be a way to put to deal with both concerns. You have an agenda-focused board meeting on Thursdays, but you have a concerned-focused work session on Mondays. I'll take some time and think about this. It won't be by close of business tomorrow.
No, that's fine.
But I'll get it to you soon.
Ms. Stern.
Also, another thing is the chair does have the privilege of moving the delegates if need be. I've been at board meetings before when people wanted to speak about something and they were at the end of the meeting and they'd move them to the first. Also, I have been at a board meeting before when we had them at Tyner, that a little girl was all dressed up to address the board in the board meeting, and so long she fell asleep and didn't get to address the board, and that's always bothered me. Because, she should have been able to speak at the first of the meeting. She was a little 5-year-old, 6-year-old girl, whatever. And so the chair does have the privilege of moving things around on the agenda if need be. If somebody wants to speak about something in there, put it at the end and move them to the front so they can be heard before we vote. Just no.
All right, anything else on that item? All right, any other board policies there? Again, these are all first read. Okay, we'll move down to then the approval of appropriation of the fund balance for capital maintenance. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Did you get them, Ms. Ford?
Yes.
All right, any discussion? Go ahead, Mr. McClendon.
I just want to say thank you that we have been lucky enough to get this increased sales tax revenue, and that we said what we were going to do is put it straight into to maintenance. So I'm just glad that we're back to that $4 million that the district used to be at a long time ago.
15 years.
And we're making a tiny bit of progress on where we need to be on that.
Anyone else? Okay, Mrs. Ford.
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes, and anybody that takes any money out here ought to be tarred and feathered. I'd like to make that amendment. Leave it alone.
Mr.
Yes.
Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes. Next item would be dedication of Sale Creek football field. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
All right, Ms. Ford?
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes.
First home game, September 3rd. Yes.
So that brings us to our next item, which would be an opportunity to discuss current situation at the Tyner campus. So I think what would be appropriate is I've asked Dr. Robertson to just kind of give us an update as to where we currently stand, and then we'll have the opportunity to have discussion and ask questions. So, Dr. Robertson.
So a couple things, just a little update on the 400 building that, you know, has received some media coverage lately. The roof damage, we've had someone assess it and recommend remediation for it. Estimated cost about $170,000. As you know, you get in, it could be more. We also had a structural person come in and assess the rest of the building just to make sure that there was nothing else in it. And that was completed earlier this week. And so students are going to be able to move back into portions of the building, not the rooms that are affected by the structural issue on the roof. It's one side of the building. You've probably seen pictures of it. So we have a fix in place for that. In terms of, I think this addition to the agenda, it goes back to the conversation that we're having about Tyner and where we are. Specifically also the $25 million in ESSER that we know that we have to have students in the building by August of 2024. Justin Wood and I have spoken about this a couple times over the last year. In some ways we do things backward. We get funding approved, then we hire an architect, and then we submit proposals or receive proposals on the plans. What this is suggesting is try to get the architect up front and have a better idea of what the cost is, then we know what money we need to go after to get this project completed. I'll bring up again, Tyner Middle School was the lowest rated building in terms of just building score on the MGT report, aside from CSLA, which CSLA, obviously, we're already working on a plan to correct that. So I don't know if that brings a kind of background and context to it, but I think that's where Ms. Jones was coming in here.
Mrs. Thurman.
Okay, this is for both schools. We're going to put both schools in one building, so we're looking at getting an architect for that one building. We don't know what's going to happen to the middle school, correct?
This is planning on getting an architect for a Tyner Middle High School.
Okay. This may not be the time to talk about it, but it might be. I don't know how quickly we can get someone to go in and start working on it, since we are working on a timeline. The kids at the high school, the school will have to be completely torn down. That's what we're looking at doing, correct?
The MGT report is for both of them to be torn down. It's
Yeah, but I mean, we're just going to put both. Are we going to put both of them in one building, or are we going to build
Yeah,
rebuild a new middle?
I think that's the architect to come up. I mean, we've got several examples of middle high schools that would be one connected building, but they're in separate wings that kind of share facilities like the cafeteria and so forth. So I think that's where the architect would come into play and discuss. One kind of side conversation that we've had is talking with the city about the land that is behind Tyner Middle High School that they own. If you recall, there's ball fields.
Right.
And kind of preliminary conversations with them about the possibility of us utilizing that land to build the new building, and then when it's done, we tear down the other ones, put ball fields back.
Well, that's why I was wondering. I thought, can the high school kids go to the middle school if we have to tear the high school down, and then everybody move over to the new building? I just wondered what we were looking at logistically.
Yeah.
We're just going to leave it completely up to the architect. And let
Yeah, I
them
think
say-
that's why we're asking these questions, is to go ahead and get on the front end of planning so that we know what the logistics would be to make this happen, and we also know what the cost would be.
Yeah. But if you're going to tear down both buildings, that's that's
Eventually, they both need to be torn down.
So there's no way we could get both buildings built by the time the ESSER, there's
No,
way this amount of
yes,
money
ma'am,
will
that's the
cover it
plan.
anyway.
I'm sorry, I wasn't being clear. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the plan. It's for Tyner Middle High School to be built before
Okay.
August of 2024.
Okay. So what, do we need to go ahead and does somebody need to make a motion to go ahead and start? Do we need to do that for next meeting, or what do we need to do in order to get
So
this process started?
This is you guys approving going ahead and hiring an architect pending
Okay.
county commission approval. So we've started having some conversations with the facilities people at county to let them know that we were going to be coming with this. And again, just to get that ball rolling so that if the county commission would agree, then we could go ahead and get the architect and answer some of the questions that you're asking.
Okay, so we need to make a motion. Okay, I make a motion to give you the authority to proceed with looking at Tyner High School. Building at
Second.
Tyner High School.
All right. Mr. Perez.
So I said this Monday, I said I'd probably repeat it today, and so I think I want to be a man of my word. The Future Ready update showed excellent mitigation of our district. We are showing increase and improvement in many areas, not that we're there yet. And our buildings are not acceptable at all. And I will never take away people's rights to be angry about whatever they want to be angry about. That's, and I'm not saying it's illegitimate, but if there is something we should be angry about as a community, is these buildings and their current state. I mean, I applaud, and I know many of us do, our Tyner students protesting the fact that they know, as every parent in the area should know, that they deserve better facilities than the facilities that they're at. And they're not the only ones who deserve better facilities than the facilities they're at. And so for me, it's not, and that's why I said, I saw fear. I try to look at eyes now and see what I respond. When I say, we're taking it from Esser, of course we're taking it from Esser, because that's where we have funding. And we're going to do that. But this should be coming from us. It should be coming from all of us, recognizing that Hamilton County Schools students, our children, our grandchildren, the leaders of this community deserve to be in buildings that are not falling apart, that are not dangerous to them. We talked about, Monday I mentioned it, I'll mention it again, but with Dr. Robertson, I talked about the fire we had at East Ridge due to a air conditioning unit. It was very small, it was before students were there, but I mean, I reached out because I'm like, this could be bad. It wasn't. We're blessed by that it wasn't, but we can't be playing, a building that starts crumbling can happen when people are inside. And we can't accept that as a community. We can't sit there and be like, we can't do anything about this. We have to act. So I don't, we're taking money from federal funds to do this, from COVID funds, which I would prefer that we had been using this to mitigate factors, but we don't have the choice because we have buildings that are falling apart. And be angry about what you want to be angry about. That's good. That's your right. That's our right. We can do that. But this is something that as a community I think we should all be angry about. This is not acceptable and we can't continue. I'm not preaching for any applause or for anything. This as a community should wake everybody up and we should be doing whatever we can. So of course I'm going to approve anything we can do to improve the situation for students at Tyner, for students at any other school whose buildings are completely below standards of any rights that students should have to be educated in a safe place. So thank you, Dr. Robertson, for the work that you guys are doing behind the scenes. But the only reason I bring this up now is the community has got to step up and say, we are going to fight for our students' rights to be in excellent buildings from now on.
Mr. McClendon.
First off, Dr. Robertson, I want to say thank you and to Ms. Jones for thinking ahead on this. And so we are operating on a tight window with those federal funds. And so I'm glad we're kind of getting the ball rolling on that. It's no stranger to anyone in this room that facilities have become very near and dear to my heart while I've been on this board by the amount of times I call Justin during a week. I sit up here and I'm ashamed that we have kids that go to a school that's like Tyner High School and Tyner Middle School and CSLA and Barger and the 19 other schools in our district that are unsatisfactory, not even failing or poor, unsatisfactory, folks, 40 to 50% on a scale of 100. That this district, this county, that's often named best place to live or this and that, we have kids going to school in condemned buildings. I've said it often, we are in a facilities crisis. And that might fall on deaf ears to some people, but this county is about to pay the price for years and years and years and years of neglect to our buildings. And our children, our students are paying the price. And not to draw a contrast to the federal government, but they're probably going to have to pay for the new schools once they get out of high school. It's unacceptable. It is unacceptable. None of us would walk in there and go to work in Tyner every single day. Yet we have students and teachers that go in every single day while the roof leaks on them. They can't eat lunch because they have water on them. And so, yeah, they're fed up. I'm fed up. And I commend them, and I'm proud of them for what they did yesterday. Because someone's got to listen. Someone has to listen to them, and we have to do better. We've made those steps. We operate within our means. But folks, this isn't getting any better. This is getting worse. The average age of our buildings is nearly 45 years old. Think about your own house. If your house is 10 years old, or 12 years old, or 20 years old, it starts getting worse, and you got to put funds into those. So I've walked buildings in every district in this this county, and it's everywhere. It doesn't matter where you live. You look at that MGT report, it is everywhere. And so I hope and pray, and I don't know the words, that this Tyner situation is a wake-up call to this county, that we have to do something. And we have to, as a board, this isn't not on us. We have to look outside the box on how to do it the most efficient and financially responsible way. Because there's ways out there to do it, and we have to look at it. But I just think we're in for a world of hurt if we don't change how we treat facilities in this county. It is going to come to a head. A lot of people don't see it every single day. I didn't see it before I got on the board, except for some of the schools I went into. But folks, it's scary. It is scary, these buildings that our kids are going into. And the clock is ticking. It is ticking every single day. So I hope this county hears this alarm going off, and we have to do something. We have to.
All right. So we had a motion from Ms. Thurman and second. Right. To go ahead and start that process. Any other discussion here before we vote on that? All right, Mrs. Ford.
Mrs. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes. All right. That brings us to our delegations portion of tonight's meeting. Oh,
Can I ask one question?
yes, ma'am.
Maybe after the delegations or whatever, maybe it might be a good time. But I just want an explanation of, I don't know if it needs to be sent to us in writing or whatever, about the quarantine policy for schools. I have a lot of calls about that. Is it by school? Do the principals do they have the autonomy to kind of do that? Or do we have a set policy about how we do it? Is it the same one we had last year? Because a lot of people seem to be quarantining in groups, that like a whole fifth grade class or a whole ball team or something like that because of one person. I thought we had like a 6-foot rule around somebody for 20 minutes, 6 feet away, and that kind of thing. So if we're not going to discuss it tonight, Joe, I know we have a long meeting, maybe if we get all that in writing and send it out so the parents will understand and we will understand what the rules are, because a lot of parents don't understand, and sometimes I don't understand.
A
Hey,
lot
Rhonda, I
of
think it's right
a lot of
here.
it's addressed in here,
Okay, thank
Rhonda. Because I'd asked for that same thing, and I hadn't got a chance to really look at this thoroughly, but I've already found answer to a couple of my questions already in this.
Just think they just
Rhonda,
gave
so
us
it'd be very
2.0.
helpful, yeah.
And so, Mr. Smith, to that point, and Ms. Thurman, we're sending out a weekly community update. We just sent it out on Thursday night. It's linked. We sent the first one with a link to that last Thursday, the first day of school. It's a real-time live document. So folks have on their email that document. They can hit our website, go to our COVID-19 landing page. It's at the top, so that people can access in real time our reopening guidance.
I just hope that, excuse me, that it's being done consistently across the county, because I'm not sure that it is with regard to how we're quarantining kids. And I know probably in your principals meetings you're stressing that, but I'm not sure that's happening consistently. Just a thought.
And I apologize, don't want to belabor it, just with my limited knowledge and what I'm hearing from parents and what we all need to be very careful with, and I'm certain that we have it in here. I know we have our chief health officer that is a state employee, but my limited knowledge is that only a state health official can quarantine someone. Y'all can correct me if I'm wrong. We have to be very cautious about teachers telling a student they're quarantined or principals. I don't want us to have that liability for any of us. So I'm not going to say limited education about that. I'm really almost 1,000% certain that only a Tennessee state health official can quarantine someone. Now again, our chief health officer works for the state, but just putting his name on the bottom of a letters that I've received and emails that I've received, we got to be very cautious about who says who is quarantined.
So I think that this is something the public health department has designated us to complete our contact tracing. So we are working with them, and they have actually said that their name at the bottom of that letter through our contact tracing process is that authority. And so Scott, you may want to speak to
that's
that,
correct.
but our public health department has absolutely designated us.
And in fact,
do that.
yesterday, the Commissioner of Health for the state of Tennessee and the Commissioner of Education sent out a joint memo to that effect, saying that once again, the Tennessee Department of Health is going to have to rely on local boards of education to do that kind of legwork.
Thank you.
All right.
Can I-
We,
may I
yeah,
actually
go ahead.
s-
Go ahead,
okay.
Ms. Robbins.
Yeah, I did just want to say that unfortunately I will have to leave a little early and I won't get to listen to all of our delegates, but I'm absolutely willing to speak to anyone one-on-one. This is unusual for us to do this at the end, and so it's unusual to have to leave early, but it's my son's 10th birthday, and so I will have to leave shortly. But I want to let you know that I will talk to any of you one-on-one, and I appreciate your time.
Dr. Robertson already used the birthday excuse. I don't think you can use that.
I wasn't here for that because I was late and I'm leaving early. So,
I only
is
get
it your
one
birthday?
shot.
Oh.
No.
Oh. All these milestones. This is wonderful.
All
Sorry,
right,
I
so
distracted us.
If you're about to speak, if you would please give your attention to Mr. McClendon.
Yeah, if you have signed up, Ms. Smith, Mr. Daughtry, Ms. Glass, Ms. Omarkel, Ms. Valdez, Ms. Howard, Ms. Chandler, Mr. or Mrs. Hall, Ms. Tollis, Ms. Madro, Ms. Cole, Ms. Popley, Mr. McGrath, Ms. Lyons, Ms. Proctor, and then our students from Tyner. If you will pay attention to this short statement. Thank you for your interest in addressing the Hamilton County Board of Education. During your presentation, please address the board as a whole, not individual board members or administrators. Also, please do not present complaints or concerns you have about individual employee of the school system. If you wish to voice those complaints and concerns, you should contact the central office and ask for a meeting with the superintendent, since the superintendent is responsible for individual employees. Please limit your remarks to 5 minutes. I will tell you when you have 1 minute left, and I will raise a piece of paper so I don't interrupt you, and you may begin when you're ready. I will start with Ms. Smith.
Good evening to the board and Dr. Towns. My name is Mari Smith. I'm a parent of 2 children in the Hamilton County school system. I've also served on the PTA and I'm a huge supporter of public education. I am here on behalf of students who do not feel safe speaking in front of this board. So I ask you to put yourself in a different position than you are in today. Imagine being a student who is afraid to go to school each day. You worry that just by being you will be harassed and or physically harmed. This is the reality for many non-binary, transgender, and queer students in our county. School is a place for learning and growing, making friends. It's a place where you should feel safe and cared for. I know that the board agrees with me on this because I've watched your meetings and I know that you care. That's why I feel that it's important for you to hear from 2 trans students that did not feel comfortable speaking here today. Quote, "At school, as a trans non-binary teen, I'm scared to go into the boys' bathroom in case of being beaten up. And I'm uncomfortable going into the girls' bathroom as I no longer am one. However, there is no easy option. At 8th grade graduation, my friends and I were walking and a boy in front of us saw me and loudly said, 'Ew, here it comes, I'm gonna kill myself.' There's only one teacher and one guidance counselor that I would have been comfortable reporting this to. Soon I will be starting high school with a new set of teachers and kids, and I'm nervous of hostile attitudes that will impact my school life." End quote. So let's put aside personal feelings that people in this room may have about the queer community. I'm not here to tell you how to think. But I'm here to tell you that no matter what you think about trans and non-binary students, they exist. They attend our schools, and they deserve respect, safety, and kindness, just like all students. Here's another trans student who wanted me to share their thoughts. Quote, "My school's always been bad about trans and LGBTQ youth. I got bullied super bad. I got notes in my locker telling me to kill myself. People used to throw rocks at me when I was getting off the bus. People would make dresses and put them in my locker. It was terrible. I would come home with bruises on my back, and when my parents went to the principal about it, he said, 'Your kid's allowed to express himself, and these kids are allowed to express themselves.' It was enraging. Hate crimes in school are bad, with and without these anti-trans laws that have been implemented recently. The people making these laws don't know anything about transgender people, and they don't know anything about homosexuality or LGBTQ youth. Still, I think we should approach them with peace and kindness and explain to them that 1 in every 4 people is part of the LGBTQ community. And for all you know, it could be your sister, your brother, your girlfriend. You have to be careful who you hate because it may be the person that you love most." End quote. So the question I would like to pose to the board is this: what can we do as members of the Hamilton County school system that will support trans and non-binary youth? How can we make them feel respected and safe? Because shouldn't that be our goal? Here's one solution. I would like to see this be a topic of conversation for the board moving forward. I know that diversity trainings for the board were on the table, and I'm not sure where we are on that, but I feel that topics regarding supporting queer and trans youth in our schools should be part of that training. And it's not enough for just the board to respect these students. Teachers and staff need training too. It's not a matter of not wanting to change the language we use or make the schools safer for queer youth. Many people in our community just don't understand how they can be more inclusive of all children. We've all been conditioned to speak and act a certain way, and we need to unlearn problematic and harmful behaviors. Teachers and staff need the tools to teach and nurture all students, queer youth included. Another solution would be implementing a zero-tolerance policy in our county regarding hate speech against queer students. Using slurs against queer students should be equated with using racial slurs against students of color. Language matters, and this kind of treatment can't be tolerated. There are numerous queer-led organizations in town that would be wonderful places to start having these conversations. This needs to be addressed. The lives of many students in Hamilton County depend on this board taking action, and I will be waiting to hear what is discussed and decided. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Daughtry.
Good evening. I'm Doug Doherty. I'm the president of a local nonprofit called Hamilton Flourishing. thank you, Chairman Wingate and the entire board for this opportunity to appeal to you. Years ago, several years ago, we were moving our house. And I had some teenagers come over to help us. And one of them was 18 years old. He just graduated from a high school. And he was looking at some of my books. And he said, what's that? And I told him what it is. I said, can't you read that? He said, no, I can't read. And he just graduated from one of the high schools. So that started me years ago being concerned about the whole area of literacy. And yesterday, Dr. Johnson, I think, was his last day. And I think you all are going to get to choose the next superintendent. And I'd like to address that opportunity. As an organization, we reach about 50,000 people in Hamilton County a week through newsletters. We're trying to do everything we can in our perspective to make the county a better place. But I'm particularly concerned about literacy rates, rising third to fourth graders, or the rising fourth graders, in the urban schools. I couldn't get data last week on the new scores. I just saw them on the presentation here. But the last year that I had data, there were 5 schools in Hamilton County that had literacy rates, proficiency rates of less than 10% for the students from graduating from 3rd going into 4th grade. So literacy proficiency in urban grammar schools is a big problem. And these children, and this has been going on for year after year, and to put it in context, this is a national problem. It's not just a local problem. So these schools, one of the things that we tried to do is we tried to put together a program where we could provide literacy tutors to one of the schools. We were trying to provide 100 tutors to come in, and we got the principal loved the idea, this community loved the idea, but somehow it got lost in the, in the administration. Illiteracy affects all areas of life. Those with low literacy skills are far more likely to live in poverty, face health problems because they can't read prescription labels or instructions, and grow isolated in a world increasingly dependent on computers. Now this is interesting. In one study I read, more than 60% of all prison inmates are functionally illiterate. Penal institutions records show that inmates have a 16% chance of returning to prison if they receive literacy help, as opposed to a 70% chance to receive no help. This data is staggering as Tyner High School falling down. I think this is the #1 issue in Hamilton County, is the literacy rate in the urban schools. It affects the child, it affects the family, it affects the taxpayer, it affects the criminal justice system, it affects the future employer, it affects the whole community. So I want to I'm not even going to take 5 minutes, Joe. So I'm here tonight just to plead with you. When you choose a superintendent, he will make early literacy their #1 priority, not number 5, not number 6, number 10, #1. When these children don't learn how to read, it affects them the rest of their life. Going back to my first story. They did change the rules, the way they teach reading in Mississippi. And Mississippi went up 16 points. It was the only state in the last year they did the national report card that went up. So please members of the school board, when you make your choice, make sure that the next superintendent will make early literacy in the urban elementary schools his #1 priority. In my mind, it's an educational, neighborly, fiscal, and moral imperative. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Ms. Glass?
Members of the school board, thank you for taking the time to listen. I know you're under a lot of pressure right now, especially as you make decisions with regards to the physical health and safety of our students this school year. My name is Lene Glass. I have 3 children, and my husband is a teacher for Hamilton County Schools. I just want to take a moment to say these meetings are one of the few chances we have to really be heard publicly in a room where we stand alongside people who may disagree with us. We don't often get the chance to voice our concerns in a space like this, and for many of us, this is a valuable opportunity. Thank you for taking that into consideration. Now to address what I really came here to talk about. During one of the first meetings my husband attended this school year, along with his fellow teachers, he was discouraged from broaching political or controversial subjects around students. These subjects which were deemed too political, included critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, vaccines, and COVID-19. Now, I'm not here to stand in front of you tonight and pick apart what material is included in the curriculum. I'm here to ask some questions. When did telling the truth become a political stance? When did encouraging children to wear a mask to reduce their chances of getting a virus become controversial? When did telling Black students that their lives matter become too polarizing? When did affirming the queer community become indoctrination? Let me be clear. I know critical race theory is not being taught in Hamilton County. However, to many parents, CRT has come to be defined as any type of material that challenges students to think about racial inequity. The desire to keep students safe from a virus that is quickly spreading among children should not be considered a controversial political stance, but it has been turned into one by the same parents who believe that they can opt their kids out of learning the truth about our nation's history. Parents are reacting out of fear to these popular terms being thrown around, pleading with school boards to revise their curriculums and asking that they reject anything they categorize as too divisive or age inappropriate. However, by doing this, I think the intelligence of our kids is being undermined. Through their actions, many parents are showing a deep distrust in the education system and in their own children, implying that as soon as their kids hear a new point of view, they will suddenly become indoctrinated with an agenda. I want to challenge my fellow parents to give our kids some credit. They are capable of learning about these controversial subjects. Even if we shut down these conversations from happening in a classroom environment, they are still happening. But instead of taking place in a room where they have a teacher to help guide them and support their curiosity, kids are having these discussions on the bus, in their text messages, and on the playground. I believe that by sending our kids to public school, we are making a statement that we trust our educators to do their best at facilitating these conversations about tougher subjects, and we trust our kids to take the information they hear in the classroom and decide what they do with it. It isn't our job as parents to cover our children's ears when the truth comes up in conversation. It is our job to hold their hands and walk with them as they learn. All of this said, my hope for this school year and future years to come is that we do not get to a point where teachers are not allowed to truly teach their kids anymore. I do not believe that a teacher's sole job is to teach addition and subtraction while remaining quiet about racism and a global pandemic. I believe good educators stand on the side of justice and truth when politics come up in the classroom. Taking a stance shouldn't be seen as a threat, but as an opportunity for teachers to model what it looks like to be honest and inclusive in a world that is often divided and unjust. Thank you.
Ms. Omarkel.
Thank you, Chairman Wingate, Dr. Towns, and board members for providing the opportunity for me to speak tonight. I want to begin by thanking you for approving the COVID leave. I know that was a tough decision in some ways. It is something that was not on the table as we thought the need for it was behind us, and this small gesture helps your staff feel valued, and it is appreciated. Thank you for adjusting the classified salaries and your ongoing efforts to raise them to an appropriate level. Although we can no longer conference for them, we support them 100%. Thank you for approving the ESSER 3 plan or looking through that. This plan will provide the funds to help move our students forward as well as address other urgent needs in our district. We are at a critical time in the journey of Hamilton County Schools, and HCS staff, board, and community can proudly look back at last year and celebrate the victories. We kept the schools open. We kept our people as safe as possible through our mitigation. We had some gains in spite of the disruption of teaching and learning, as evidenced in our data from benchmark testing as well as TCAP. We are now at a crossroads as we look ahead. We are facing many unknowns this year. How will the Delta variant impact us? Who will be chosen as our new superintendent? How will these changes impact our students and our working environment? I encourage you to take time this year to visit your buildings, to talk with students, and listen to the teachers and your staff beyond the administrators. They can't always come to these meetings. It would be amazing to see you in their classes, even taking time for them and teaching in the class for them. We need subs. It could work to our advantage. We need to be aware of the stressors that can take our focus off of our priority, which is teaching and learning. One of the things that is on your agenda for looking at tonight for a first read was the Code of Professional Conduct. I think that this is going to cause a stressor if you pass this policy. We wholeheartedly agree that educators are held in esteem by the public and should conduct themselves as professionals deserving of such respect. But we feel that this policy is unnecessary, as there is already a state law in place that addresses the expectations for educators on and off campus. It is very clear and outlines thoroughly the level of behavior expected by school system employees. Why is there a need to have this policy as well? You could just affirm that Hamilton County will follow the law. Instead of creating a policy that is already addressed in law, we could start by making sure we are doing all that can be done to educate the employees on their expectations. HCA already has access to training available for ethics, professionalism, and social media that has been supported by the state for professional development points. We already offer it to our members, and we are happy to partner with you to provide this as an option for training for employees. Our training is not a video presentation. It is either in person or blended to allow opportunity for clarification and understandings through questions and dialogue. We know from our experience with students in this past year, that asynchronous learning alone is not enough. Allow us to support this need. Please vote to not to create a policy, instead validate the law that's in place. Let us keep our focus on teaching and learning and our children, because our children don't have the luxury or time for us to take our focus off of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Valderez.
Good evening. I am here in response to my speech from last month. Some board members boldly did say that components of critical race theory were not being taught in our schools. So I've been in leadership managing people for about 6 to 7 years. I have this phrase that I use is trust but verify. So trust what our school members are saying, trust what your constituents are saying, but also go ahead and just verify the information just in case. So that's what I did. Not only myself, but other mothers and parents as well. We went through hours and hours of teacher materials, books, curriculums, even websites that are being used for curriculum as well in Hamilton County schools, and found that there indeed are components of critical race theory being taught in our schools. Of course, the term critical race theory is never being used. There's all sorts of different terminology that is being used. And again, coming from the state of Washington, I've experienced almost every single term that they've used, so today I'll be focusing on social emotional learning. I have for you today an example of a book that it's pretty harmless. I read it in 5th grade, maybe 4th grade. It's called Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz Ryan. And it's about a girl and her mother that legally migrated from Aguascalientes, Mexico to the United States. The book takes place a little bit after the Mexican Revolution and teaches readers to never be afraid to start over, especially when you're migrating from one country to another. That's a pretty huge change, and you definitely have to start your life over. In the book, there is a character named Miguel, and he is Esperanza's friend. And he always tells her that in the United States, if one works hard enough, they will get to places. He also says that in the United States, a servant could become rich and move up in life as well. And this story, it's such a wonderful example of the mentality that the Hispanic community holds, because we truly do believe that the United States is the greatest country in the world, and that hard work absolutely pays off. That's something that my parents taught me at a very young age. They taught me patriotism, even when I thought that I was from Mexico. I wasn't born in Mexico, I was born in San Diego, California. My parents made sure that I was always very loyal to my country because they were able to come and, like Esperanza, have absolutely nothing and be part of the middle class and raise us in that class as well. So what I discovered when I was going through the material, the teacher curriculum and the assignments, is that they are not at all aligned with the book's overall themes. In fact, it's pretty hard to believe that the curriculum is for English, language, and arts. You'd think that it was for like world history or maybe social studies. The curriculum focuses on taking specific quotes from the book and making connections to human rights threats using the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was written, I want to say in the late 1940s, maybe 1948, after the Nazi regime and the awful things that they did. So this, for example, students are to take a quote on page 102, and I don't have the book for you all, but I do have a quote where it's in one of the chapters called Las Cebollas, and the description, event, and quote from the text that is being used is Esperanza, they will only give one cabin for each man and his family. There is no housing for a single woman. This is a family camp. So we must have a male head of household to live and work here. And they ask the students to take this specific quote and connect it to the UDHR Article 22, which says, we all have the right to affordable housing, but Mama Esperanza are not being given that right. And although I'm not against teaching history, it's very important that our children know about this history. It's also important that they know that it is no longer as prevalent as teachers might make it sound, or maybe not even teachers, but curriculum might make it sound. I recommend that this curriculum be removed from our schools. I also recommend that Hamilton County focus on academic excellence instead of teaching children to view the world solely on feelings. That's exactly what social emotional learning does, and that's a component of critical race theory. And I make this recommendation because like I said, I've been managing employees for 6 to 7 years, and one of the things that I've noticed is that they have a hard time understanding the basic structure of a sentence in English. They also have a hard time understanding simple English sentences, and that makes it very hard to produce very good employees in the workforce. So thank you.
Ms. Howard.
Thank you. I have a senior in Hamilton County Schools. He's in the Mechatronics Academy program. Fabulous program. Appreciate that. I have a 10th grade daughter who was in Hamilton County Schools and has been withdrawn after we saw what was being taught and how it impacted her. I hadn't planned to say it, but I feel like I need to. We spent several years as foster parents. I was adopted out of foster care. We fully believe in loving children. We've never put any qualification on that. We have welcomed Black, brown, Native American children into our family. They shared our home, our bedroom, my daughter's bedroom, my son's bedroom. We love those children. My kids love those children. After her time at the East Hamilton High School, the deciding factor for us to pull her out was when my daughter looked at me and said, "Mom, I never used to think about it, but now I see someone with black skin or brown skin, and I'm afraid they will hate me because I have white skin." So parents are coming to you and expressing concerns about what children are learning in our schools. Parents have mentioned anti-police, anti-American, hypersexualized content. Have you asked why? Why are parents concerned? Will this district, I ask again, will you call for an evaluation, an honest assessment of the materials? What is causing this? I've heard the board say you don't have authority over curriculum choices. I understand the state sets the standards, creates a list of curriculum that the district gets to choose from, the buffet, as I heard it called. Then a committee within the district takes that list, makes a recommendation to this board about what should be implemented in our district. So using that same analogy, the committee chooses what items to put on the plate and hands it to this board, and the board decides what is actually going to be consumed. That is why parents are asking you and coming to you for help. At the work session, I heard someone mentioned that concerned parents need to talk to curriculum folks. We can do that, we will do that, but they're district employees. They're not officials that were elected to represent us. That's why parents are coming to you. We understand that you are our representatives. We're still learning. So using the process described, Hamilton County School District chose Open Up Resources curriculum by a company called EL Education. That's used to teach K through 5 English language arts. Education's company documents say things like they embrace a vision of education as a powerful engine for disrupting structural racism. They're dedicated to the power of student leadership for social justice. They state that they subscribe to author Ibram X. Kendi's ideas. Kendi has been called critical race theory's chief marketing officer. So how does that belief system that they state affect the curriculum they create and our students are taught? Listen to parents and they'll tell you, or read it, read the material, you'll see it. For grades 6 through 12, Hamilton County Schools have chosen to use the My Perspective curriculum created by Savas. 9th grade student book, page 14. In here it says, it defines WASP, W-A-S-P, short for White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. But then it goes further. Typically refers to a member of the dominant and most privileged class of people in the United States. Are we supposed to be teaching about privilege, different groups of people? I have to say, same page. What is the point of this splintered whole? What is the point of a nation in which Arab cabbies chauffeur Jewish passengers through the streets of New York? Jewish cabbies chauffeur Arab passengers too. Yet speak in theory of hatred one for the other. What is the point of a nation in which one part seems to always be on the verge of fisticuffs with another? Blacks and whites, gays and straights, left and right, Pole, Chinese, Puerto Rican, and Slovenian. Other countries with such divisions have in fact divided into new nations and with new names. That does not sound, and I had to skip over the anti-American part. I can share it with you separately. That doesn't sound pro-American, and it does not sound unifying. I want to be clear, this is not...
That's your time.
It's a material problem, not a teacher problem.
Ms. Chandler. Ms. Chandler.
I'm kind of bouncing off of the curriculum that Moms for Liberty has been reviewing. And I'm here today to read from and do a quick review of one of the Hamilton County High School's recommended reading suggestions. The book I'm reviewing is called More Than We Can Tell by Bridget Kimmerer. Published in 2018, Bridget Kimmerer is described as an author of dark and alluring young adult novels. It was recommended by a librarian at Saudi Daisy High School. This book contains many inappropriate subjects for a school system to be introducing to students age 14 and up. Children these days are being hit with sexual and violent content from all sides. Cable television, music, and all over the internet. Parents are spending massive amounts of time having to review content being streamed into our homes. I would hope I could trust our schools, at the very least, not to recommend books that glamorize these subjects. I'm now going to read you some examples. Chapter 1, page 1. You suck. And that's what I'm going to say when I find you and shove it in your mouth hole. Gross. At least this guy didn't include a dick pic. Chapter 1, page 7. Well, I don't want to play with a douchebag. And let me tell you, I'm so excited about having explained to my 14-year-old what a douchebag is when she asked me after reading this book. Chapter 5, page 1. Don't make me find you, bitch. Chapter 8, page 74. I can do this all day, baby. Tell me, do you charge for sucking? Chapter 22, page 184. I think it's a crime. No, you think it's a crime to think about hurting someone? You could walk up to any kid at high school, and I guarantee you, they've had a violent thought in the last 24 hours. And I'm just going to stop with the examples there. While I realize these students are not all saints, and most have heard this type of language, it is not okay for a school to be recommending it. Does anyone else review these books after they are recommended? There are millions and millions of well-written, enlightening novels that our children are missing out on, only to be placed with this?
Thank you. Jamie Hall.
All right, my name is Jamie Hall. I'm a mom of 4 children, all of whom have been in the public school system. At any given time, up until last year, I had at least 2 in our district, District 3. And tonight, I just want to talk about the fact that, first of all, it's mine and my husband's job to care for, protect, encourage, teach, guide our children, and so much more. I began homeschooling my children last year because it's what I knew was best for my family. And during this past year, my eyes have been opened to so much. And I now know that many things must change before I will ever consider putting my children back into the system. I realize that not every parent has the opportunity to homeschool like I am. So I'm here to fight for those children and for those families, and hopefully for the future of maybe my children re-entering the school system. Tonight, let's focus on some concerning issues with our 3rd grade language arts curriculum. My youngest is 8 years old. She's in 3rd grade, so this hits really close to home for me. As we begin, I'd like you to consider your perspective, your thoughts when you think about Peter Pan. When you remember hearing Peter Pan as a child or watching the movie, what are your memories? I would venture to say that for the most part, we as a whole, or at least in majority, see Peter Pan as a story of fantasy, of flight, of fun, some excitement as they encounter a pirate seeking revenge, leading to suspenseful sword fights. This is a family of children that gets the opportunity to fly away to Neverland, escaping into its fantasy land where nobody grows up, and they eventually come home to a loving home where they were happy. While the reading material provided to the children is the story of Peter Pan, the teacher talking points and the lens through which the children are guided to analyze the books is where we raise some flags. Before the children get into the story, they are introduced to the author and historical context, but the historical context is presented with a negative viewpoint, and this is where the text and the teaching begin. This is where the teachers begin leading to a different interpretation of Peter Pan. So we meet the author. The author is James Matthew Barry. In the beginning, this is actually the children's EL education book. It talks about how he met a family of 5 boys and their mother. These children inspired him to invent fantasy stories about a boy called Peter Pan who had adventures, which Barry would tell the boys to entertain them. So right here it's telling us that the author's intentions is to entertain these children with fantasies and adventures, all right? It goes down, it talks about the historical context, and then there's a subheading of stereotypes. And it talks about some negative viewpoints about social interactions and stuff, but I want to talk about where it leads in one of the later paragraphs as we meet the author and the history. At this time, society considered women to be physically and intellectually weaker than men. Many thought that women should not work outside the home and that only men were responsible for earning money to support their families. As a result, a lot of the literature from this time portrays the stereotype of women and girls as maternal and motherly. For the most part, we are maternal and motherly, so I don't know why we have to look at that in a negative viewpoint. They are also depicted as doing jobs in the home like sewing socks while their husbands are out working all day. So this is where we're starting. And then the teachers, this is their speaking points, the overview of what's being taught. Students are asked to analyze this book through the lens of the time period it was written, which we just looked at, women and what they think about that. This includes the analysis of racial and gender stereotypes. Again, this is the teacher's guide of how to discuss this. I never considered in Peter Pan any racial and gender stereotypes. I don't know about you. This is with the goal of encouraging students to critique familiar and popular stories rather than to not recognize or ignore the injustices presented. Again, there's some leading there. That's not something you get out of Peter Pan. Students will critique the textbook, this is 3rd grade, in a book review and rewrite a scene from the text to right the wrongs. Now I put a star by this talking point. The teacher is to consider providing background information and discussion on racial prejudice, women's rights, and stereotyping. We are leading right into a whole CRT discussion here, all kinds of things that we don't need to be talking about. This gives free rein to teachers in their classroom.
That's your time.
Where there's no accountability right now because we are not allowed in.
Ms. Tolis.
Hello, my name's Jeanette Toulis, and I am a parent, also a private tutor, and I'm a lifetime lover of history, especially American history. When I was a little girl, I used to beg my mom when she went to rummage sales to bring home every history textbook she could find because I just really, really enjoyed reading them. And today, I still enjoy history very much. I enjoy teaching history, reading history books, and seeing children have a love of history. So it's very disheartening and concerning and disconcerting to see how the script in the EL education book tells the teachers to instruct their students to view the Declaration of Independence. Oh, I have to correct something. I know that it said that I was going to talk about the incomplete revolution, but I'm instead talking about the lesson on the Declaration of Independence. This is in the 4th grade EL education book on the American Revolution. So again, I'm speaking on how the Declaration of Independence was viewed. So it is not viewed as a document in which brave, freedom-loving men declare their independence from a colonial power that viewed them as a way to pay off their debts via heavy, oppressive taxation of the colonies. But instead, in this book, which we're using today, the Declaration of Independence is viewed as a foundation for racism. The Declaration of Independence was a document which started with a wonderfully articulate preamble, which was a vision of freedom, and then it listed the grievances the colonists had against the crown, who was, of course, King George III. Now, when I taught the Declaration of Independence to my students, I emphasized the courage of the signers who knew the danger into which they were placing themselves, their families, and those who valued freedom from tyranny over their own personal safety. We need to remind ourselves of this kind of courage in these times in which we live. But EL education, which is very upfront, as someone just said, about their goals, on their own website, they're very upfront about it. They use the now familiar language of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are pretty much known euphemisms for critical race theory, which is racist in its core, Marxist in its origins, and seeks to divide, to create mistrust, to create classes of Americans where one is the oppressed and one is the oppressor. And this book takes a completely different approach to the Declaration of Independence. They create an entire unit based on the last of the 27 grievances of the colonists against the crown. Here's how the grievance reads in the actual Declaration of Independence. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is the undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So in this document, the signers were pointing out that the British Crown and its representatives were encouraging, using money, whiskey, land protection, other inducements, the Native Americans to attack the colonists. The signers were saying that the British knew how the Indians fought and that their rules of engagement were of the Native and North American Indians was that they attacked men and women and children, and the British were exploiting this pagan cruelty to harass and massacre the colonists, especially those at the outposts. So it's very sad to me that the script that teachers are given when they explain this part of the Declaration of Independence, that they are blaming the signers of the Declaration for the mistreatment of the Indians in future years in American history. Did the Americans treat the Indians fairly? No, they did not. But was this because of what was written in the Declaration of Independence? No, it was not. But that's what this material teaches. So the text that the teacher reads, and this is directly from the instructions what the teacher should say. How would you say, propelled into action in your own words? And from this, what can you infer about the treatment of the American Indians? And the correct answer is, they were probably treated badly because the people thought it was fair to do so as a result of what the Declaration of Independence said. I mean, that is just not at all what was intended in this document. So from what the Declaration of Independence said, the colonists saw the Native American as a victim of British exploitation. There's no evidence the Declaration of Independence was a foundation for later mistreatment. To allege this is a terrible twisting of the truth, to attempt to make our students, our American students, view their founding document as an instrument of racism against Native Americans. Why would a curriculum company do such a thing? Only because they have an agenda, which they're very upfront about, a set of presuppositions in which they must fit their facts to the predetermined assumption that our founding fathers were racist. So this may be insignificant.
That's your time.
Oh, thank you. Just do what you can to find a different curriculum. Thank you.
Ms. Madro.
Hey, Mr. Smith, I was listening one page. Good evening, school board members. My name is Heather Madro. I am a teacher at Eastridge Elementary. Congratulations, Mr. Walker. I am in District 9 as a resident. Today, I am bringing forth questions regarding policy 5.6011, which is on the agenda tonight for first read, but nobody even discussed it, which I find quite interesting. The Code of Professional Conduct. So my questions are, why do we even need a separate policy? We already have the Teacher Code of Ethics, 49-51003, that was updated in 2019. HCS's new policy refers to this Tennessee code in that new policy in the legal reference footnotes. Why create a redundant policy? Secondly, the policy states it's about public trust and confidence by holding staff to the highest professional standards in both our professional and personal lives. There are two issues that I have with this. One, trust and confidence from the public are subjective based on the topic. We witness this every time at the board meeting. Number two, why does it matter what I do on my personal life if it doesn't impact my students' learning? Why am I not afforded my personal freedoms when I'm away from the school and my students? Additionally, this policy changes language from make a reasonable effort to protect the students from conditions harmful to the learning or health and safety in the Tennessee Code to employees must protect the health and safety of students. Reasonable effort to protect, must protect. In a pandemic, how can you require teachers to protect the health and safety of students when our hands are tied by the state with an opt-out order, Executive 84? What are the legal ramifications for staff if a child becomes seriously ill? Are we going to be sued? This certainly is a heavy responsibility, a statement right out of the new policy. Why is this policy even necessary? It is redundant and subjective. It was tabled last year in November. It should be rejected again and stricken, as Tennessee has provided us with a professional code of conduct. That's what we need. We don't need another policy.
Thank you. Ms. Cole.
Good evening. My name is Shannon Cole, and I am here as a parent from District 3. Parents have been trying to sound the alarm for you on what is actually going on in some of the classrooms across Hamilton County. Have any of you been reaching out to those parents from your district for a better understanding or insight into the claims being brought to this board? The bell that I'm ringing today is a book recommended by the librarian at East Ridge High School called On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. Published in 2019, it has won 7 awards and film rights have already been sold. So why is this acclaimed book on my radar as dangerous? It's rife with anti-cop rhetoric, white hate speech, and criminally accepted lifestyles. Being introduced to students in District 8, our county's highest crime area, is a disservice to that community by that librarian. This harsh accusation is based on my own personal experience. As a survivor of child abuse, I never read that type of material because I lived it. This book validates a way of life for many in East Ridge. Children are presently being lied to and used in a political tug of war as displayed in this literary garbage with its anti-cop rhetoric, such as page 23. It's supposed to be on some, "Hi, I'm your friendly neighborhood cop who won't shoot you" type shit, but it comes off as some "we're keeping an eye on your black asses" type shit. Page 51. Not that the garden was ever a utopia, hell no. But before, I only worried about GEDs and crowns. Now I gotta worry about the cops too. Seeing the cop get away with murder probably make them invincible. That's been our nickname for Malik since the riots, Malik X. He's been on another level, always talking about social justice, reading up on stuff like the Black Panthers. He's not a cop. He doesn't have a gun. But I don't want to end up like that boy. This is like that talk she gave me about the cops. Do whatever they tell you to do, she said. Don't make them think you're a threat. Basically weaken myself and take whatever's thrown at me so I can survive that moment. Sometimes the rules are different for black folks, baby. You gotta play it by a different set of rules. Last page for the cop rhetoric. Now that armed police officers have been brought on, honestly, many of us fear for our lives. Now let me also show you a few examples of the white hate speech in this book. Page 24. Unfortunately, to some people in the garden, it's nerd shit. Or as some fool at the swap meet said, it's white shit. Do the white girls who make slick comments get sent to your office every week too? Page 102 says, Jay says, which is her mother, sounds about right. You mean sounds about white, says Aunt Gina. Page 140. How about you free these nuts for you and your clan sisters? Sonny asked, holding his crotch. According to Granddaddy, I jump to conclusions faster than lies jump between white kids' heads. So drugs and gangs are portrayed as an old friend or family in Bree's life. These snippets speak for themselves. On page 23, metal detectors at the neighborhood club are perceived as normal, yet not at her mostly white school. Page 56, school pride turns us into gangs. Page 81, yeah, they're gangbangers and they've done all kinds of foul shit that I don't even want to know about, but I'm enough to them, so frankly they're enough to me. Page 110, you think I'm a thug? Well, I claim it. Page 218. That's how it goes, though. The drug dealers in my neighborhood aren't struggling, everybody else is. The last reference. He makes it sound like she's dead. Around here, though, folks in jail get t-shirts in their honor, just like folks in the grave. So using this lens of Marxist ideology, this blatant example of CRT condemns America's political, social, and legal systems as being embedded in racism. CRT is an academic theory that emerged more than 40 years ago. My job as a parent is to alert you. Your job as a parent is to remove it. Thank you.
Ms. Popple?
All right, good evening. I taught at 2 different Title I schools in Hamilton County.
First of all, I want to start by saying that I am grateful to live in a state that gives guardians a mask choice, especially when the science unfortunately disagrees on whether they are healthy for children. I am here today to ask you to vote no on virtual learning, aka Zoom and busy work, if it comes up this year. If our purpose is to give children the best learning environment possible, then we must think of all children, especially the ones that I used to teach in Title I schools. I am here today advocating for those kids. Every professional development that teachers attend reminds them that worksheets don't grow dendrites. We've been told this our entire careers. Busy work is okay for practice, but kids need to be engaged in rigorous hands-on learning activities with peers to promote maximum learning. Virtual learning or busy work is not a best practice for our kids, and everybody knows this. Let me tell you about some of my Title I school kids, because school is a safe place for them. Many of them were eager to come to school on Monday and uneasy feeling going home on Friday. We fed and supported them and made them feel loved. I had many students ask me if I could be their mother. I would like to emphasize that some of these children do not live in safe environments. If virtual learning comes up, please remember all of these kids, especially some of the ones that I used to teach, and reject virtual learning and relentless quarantines, because school is a safe place for those kids.
Mr. McGrath? Mr. McGrath?
I'm super nervous. It's my first time speaking in a large group. Board members who answered my phone call, thank you. And Joe, I'm sorry I yelled at you a bunch, but it's still going to happen. So the teacher who just spoke said a lot of what I'm going to talk about. The quarantines and everything that come down are unfair. The kids who do get quarantined do not get proper education. They get workbooks or they get emails from their students. They're just not properly educated. If that be the case, then we do need to have online learning, but I don't want that to be the case, and nor do I think a lot of you. There's a clear-cut line being drawn in the sand from the letters that I received that if you're vaccinated, you can attend school and go properly, and if you're not, you don't have that opportunity. I don't trust the vaccine. All right, anything that comes out within 8 months, when prior to that 4 years was the fastest vaccine ever in history, I just don't trust it. I might be wrong in 2 years, and at that time, my oldest will be 16 years old, and maybe we'll revisit this conversation. It either works or it doesn't, and if you believe it does, why does it matter if I get it or not? Masks work or they don't, why does it matter if my kid wears it or not? They either do or they don't. There's no gray area in this stuff. And by you mandating and following these policies and the recommendations, because I called every single level of this government from the state down that said that it is only recommendations right now. Even the CDC is only saying it's recommendations. So this recommendation that you guys are putting onto my children is giving them an unfair education. And it may only be 14 days, and my kid is strong. He'll persevere past this. But what about the kids who don't have the opportunity to be at home and to have a safe place? Answer. I gave 3 minutes so you guys can answer me. Give me an answer. I didn't think so.
Ms. Lyons?
I'm Taylor Lyons. I have 2 students at Westview Elementary. Members of the board, thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you this evening. Again, I know you're tired and frustrated, and quite frankly, I am as well. I am frustrated that I am here to respond to a number of non-existent issues. But that appears to be the state of our nation and our community at present, so here I am. Not only is book banning and critical race theory not on your agenda for discussion this evening, not only did our governor recently pass vague legislation banning the use of critical race theory in our public schools, but I posit critical race theory was not a term that most of the people opposing it even knew a year ago, yet here I am defending our children's rights to be taught honestly and accurately and reading books that reflect diverse life experiences. I wish that we were coming to you united as a community to talk about real, pressing, legitimate issues. Like, for example, the student who brought a gun to one of our county schools last week. Or how about, for example, and I'm glad you discussed it, the horrible conditions at Tyner, which are so bad that students organized a walkout protest yesterday. We invited several of them to join us this evening, and you'll hear from them directly after me. Or perhaps we could talk about the fact that we have almost 2,000 students right now out on quarantine because of an explosive, huge surge in COVID numbers. And as it has been made abundantly clear by our state leadership, by our local authorities, and by this board, that you will respect the wishes and the rights of the parents who choose not to follow the advice, the near unanimous advice of every major leading medical expert. Those rights will be respected. We would like to know how our rights to feel like our children are safe and their health is being prioritized, and the faculty and staff's health is going to be prioritized, how those rights are going to be respected. Those are the conversations that we should be having this evening, yet here we are again debating the importance of telling somewhat uncomfortable truths in our classrooms. So my words are going to be brief tonight. I don't want to take any more of your valuable time. I just want to show you, if I can, a piece of artwork that my 8-year-old did in school last year. You see, it says, Black Lives Matter. He wrote, "We the people and I believe" on their shirts. I show this as an example that it's entirely possible for a kid to love themselves and to love their country and be proud of their country and have difficult conversations about our nation's past. To dive deep and talk with their students about how to solve the issues that currently face us and to have hope for the future. This gives me hope. This gives me hope. And there's nothing particularly exceptional or enlightened about my kid. We just live in a house where words like diversity, equity, inclusion, love, compassion, and empathy are synonymous with one another. Just like when I told my kids they had to wear a mask this year, again, to help protect their teachers and their fellow students, they said, "Sure, Mom," and didn't say another word about it. That's because our kids are amazing human beings. They're loving, they're smart, they're capable of having hard conversations about difficult subjects. And somehow, they are the ones who are demonstrating to us how to live through a global pandemic with care and compassion for the most vulnerable in our community. I wish that we adults could look to them for our encouragement, to dig down deep, find our love, our compassion, our humanity for each other, and refocus on things that matter. These students from Tyner deserve all of our attention. Thank you for letting me speak tonight.
Our speakers from Tyner, I know there's multiple.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jalen Sims. Tyner Academy was first built in the year 1907, and since that time, the world changed significantly. We split the atom, we put a man on the moon, and we created the addiction of social media. But while the world was changing, Tyner stayed the same. As a representative of the whole school of Tyner Academy, I can say that our school and our students have broken barriers that no other school in the county has. In 2021, our senior class earned over $5 million in both in-state and out-of-state scholarships. Our students have secured internships at companies such as EPB, WDEF, and Erlanger that will put them well above their peers in college. That's why today I am making another demand for you, the board members, to pressure the city commissioners so that we can get our funds. Although Tyner is small, our potential is big. I will now yield my time to Ms. Kaylee Moore.
According to Hamilton County's Department of Education Board goals, they are committed to success for all students through increased student achievement, parent and community involvement, safe schools, and accountability. They also strive to enhance and strengthen the programs that promote good citizenship, teach character education, and value diversity. Safe schools stood out to me the most because my school conditions at Tyner Academy are nowhere near safe. Ceiling tiles are falling apart. There are mold and asbestos on nearly every wall, and every time it rains, Tyner leaks. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and of course, the member of the Board of Education. I am Kaylee Moore, a senior at Tyner Academy, and on behalf of the students at Tyner, we just want better for our school. Tyner is crumbling day by day, and students are in distress. Since the closing of our freshman building, containing 9 classrooms, freshman lockers, and our library, teachers have to share their classrooms and carry their belongings everywhere, and our freshmen who have little to no knowledge of our building are scattered. This makes our hallways crowded and getting an education more difficult. We shouldn't have to worry if we have a classroom to learn in or if the ceiling is going to fall on us at any moment. Tyner has one of the oldest buildings, and with that, hasn't received any renovations in 83 years. Alumni walk through every day and state everything looks identical from when they attended 10, 20, 30, even 40 years ago, just more dirty and rotten. When I walk the halls, it feels as if they placed kids in an abandoned prison with posters to make it look like a school. If our school is y'all's top priority, then why don't we see any change? Safe schools are a goal for the Board of Education, but for 5 years, it has been known our environment is unsafe. I know there is only $25 million that we can work with, and I thank you so much for getting that approved. So let's use this as a first step and get the commissioners on board to fund this as well. Please be on our side and give us either a fixed date or a specific timeline for our building. Although Tyner is small, our potential is huge.
Good evening. I'm Demetrius Lanston, and I'm a 16-year-old senior at Tyner Academy. For quite some time now, I've been thinking, why am I fighting for a new school? What is this? What is the reason for this? But then I figured out why. I am not fighting for a new school. I am fighting for a school that has been promised to us. I was in 8th grade when I heard about the new school building. In December of 2017, they were supposed to start the new school building, and it's supposed to be finished of January of 2020. When is our time? We are tired of going to school and seeing our school building crumbling. When I first started, I seen this warm, welcoming high school. Now I just see a prison that we just go to school and learn. It has affected our learning, and it has affected our environment. I ask you, as the school board members, to help us get our school fixed. Thank you.
All right, so thank you all for your time, and that will bring us now to our events and announcements. So you'll see there that Wednesday, September the 1st is a remote day. Monday, September the 6th will be the Labor Day holiday for our schools and district office. Monday, September the 13th will be our next agenda work session, and then our next board meeting will be Thursday, September the 16th. One thing that I do want to just remind you all of before we go, we've had many requests here in the last month or so amongst board members to find a time to have a retreat or be able to have a more intensive work session. So just be thinking about that. I know we got a lot going on. I know we've already got multiple dates here in the next month that we'll be seeing each other as we've got much work to do. And just, again, be thinking about that, and I'm going to bring that back up here, in the next week or so as we, a couple weeks as we see each other, when might be the most opportune time to do that, okay?
We have meetings. We have meetings on September 2nd and 9th as well.
That's right. All right, if we have nothing else, I'll go ahead, Mrs. Sturman.
Selfridge football game, new stadium, the 3rd.
You can't wait.
All right.
Long
All
time
right.
coming.
All right. Meeting adjourned.